coaster cap. Going in my lacking in the twisted cap. And then the gears back, the coaster cap. Tango on ice in the back CP. Do a roll it out now. Ready to fly on the street.
The Graduate Certificate of Revenue Management is critical for developing our future leaders.
We're experiencing quite a great shortage of skilled revenue management professionals.
And it's not just in hospitality that you'll be able to take this skill set. Food delivery services, cruise lines.
Also, it will support their staff retention, encourage organisational growth with the strong skills behind it.
I find the flexibility of online learning fantastic for my schedule. Without it, I couldn't see myself studying such a thing.
I love that today the discipline of revenue management is a highly valued skill set across a broad range of industries. It's a transferable skill set and it's in demand globally. I'm Melissa Callan and I'm the founder of the Australian Revenue Management Association, also known as ARMA. This subject is important in our industry because accommodation operators sell a perishable asset. So with that I mean their accommodation rooms, for example, once a night passes, all opportunity to generate revenue and profit from that product has been lost forever. So the strategy of revenue and yield management allows the operator to unlock hidden revenue and profit opportunities. It's the step between creating demand and serving their customers, and that's what's exciting about it. I love the sense of personal satisfaction that you feel when you actually see the results of your strategies come to fruition. So from the time a day rolls into a system range in the computer system, there's a strategy behind every day of the week. And once that night passes and you see how things panned out, it gives you a really great sense of achievement. A lot of the best revenue managers are people that are always questioning things. They're curious. They're able to interpret stories from data and read between the lines as well to come up with strategies that they can implement. I love approaching their business with a fresh set of eyes and seeing those light bulb moments that they have as operators. And sometimes it just takes a small tweak on something to get great uplift in revenue and profits.
What inspired me to study the Graduate Certificate of Revenue Management was the fact that I have a lot of passion in that subject. I find the flexibility of online learning fantastic for my schedule. Without it, I couldn't see myself studying such a thing. So valuable because there is nothing like it in industry. It allows our future leaders to learn about revenue management and then take their skills and put them into practice in our hotels. I've been very lucky to have the support of my senior hotel managers and leaders, and they've allowed me to put to practice everything I've learned and take a few risks. So far it's been very successful. The hotel has benefited financially, so everyone's very happy with me. The words of encouragement that I have for anyone thinking about the Graduate Certificate of Revenue Management is simply to go for it. You've got absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain.
You and fill it with the
Okay.
first question.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it.
So I guess I can start now. I think people are spread in the room, so I'm going to do a very, very quick introduction. Thanks for coming this morning. I think it's breakfast time. This session will be moderated by Melissa. It's a partnership between what we do at Torrance University and at Blue Mountains and ARMA. Blue Mountains, you probably know Blue Mountains and Torrance University from what we do in undergraduate programs and postgraduate programs and people who start their career in hospitality. 2 years ago, we decided to develop programs more for people who are in the industry, much more advanced, and we developed a series of partnerships, and one of them is around this subject, around revenue management, and I will let Melissa then take it from there, very topical topic. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, Jerome. Well, welcome everyone, good morning, and welcome to my panellists this morning and also to our virtual viewers as well. Just to start, I'll have you guys just do a quick introduction of yourself so everyone knows who you are. Maybe Mandy.
Start at this end. Hi everyone, it's really nice to be here today. Thank you, Melissa, for inviting me. I am the Group Revenue Director for Eleanor Investors, looking after 14 hotels across Australia.
Hi, I'm Philip Stanley. I work for Sabre Hospitality, General Manager for Australia and New Zealand.
My name is Felicity Arthur and I'm General Manager at Sky Suites in Green Square. We just opened our property and we have 3 properties within the Sky Suites group here in Sydney.
Excellent, welcome. Now this morning there's actually going to be a bit of a quiz which we're going to do as well, just to get everybody thinking, nothing too scary. Nobody's going to be put on the spot with any answers, or I might pick on you, Philip.
Oh.
So if you want to participate, the questions as we continue our discussion will just pop up on the screen and you can just jot them down on a pad there, whatever you think the answers are. So we'll begin now. So revenue management, weathering the storm. So dealing with probability and uncertainty, they're factors that revenue managers deal with daily. They're a part of our skill set anyway in normal market conditions. But now with the ongoing demand shocks that we're going to or we have experienced and will continue to experience with this current crisis, can you describe why revenue management is still so valuable to business, even when there is limited demand and revenue? Felicity?
Sure, I'll take it off. So revenue management is so crucial today as much as it was yesterday, and the future as well. With the fact that there's only a limited demand out there, it's crucial that we really focus in and ensure that we get every dollar, every room sold, you know, stealing everything we can from our competitors, getting more than our fair share. And I think it really means that we need to focus on the principles of it, go back to basics, and really capture in on everything that we can do when it comes to revenue management, because that's how we're either going to do well or not.
Excellent. And Philip, did you?
Yeah, I think, I remember when it was yield management and now revenue management. And for me, I think that it's probably more important now than it was even back then. And what gives me hope is that the clients that I'm talking to, revenue managers are always involved in the conversations, even today. So there's definitely an understanding that you just can't get rid of revenue managers. And you absolutely thinking about strategies and planning for 3 months, 6 months and 12 months down the road. Clearly those plans are changing on a minute-by-minute basis, depending on what Daniel, Anastasia, and Gladys say. But having that ability to strategize and think about, plan ahead, and react sometimes very, very quickly to the changing circumstances that are around us. So I'm really pleased that general managers, etc., sales directors, and revenue managers are having those conversations, thinking about how do we plan for next week and next month.
Excellent.
So, yeah, very important.
Yeah, so agree. So it's all about trying to get the best mix out of what's available to you and understanding what's available to you. So even if those occupancies are very small, we still want to try and optimise what we can out of whatever occupancies they are. Excellent. So I'm going to put the first quiz question. There we go. So everyone can have a think about that. We will just continue our discussion and you can enjoy just reading and answering some of the quizzes as we go. All right, so as we did just touch on then, every day changes how we feel about tomorrow and the next. And predictive analytics is a very core part of the discipline of revenue management, which has become incredibly complex, certainly in sort of the short to mid-term. To be able to do that with any real degree of accuracy is very, very challenging, especially when we know, it's not driven by price, it's forces beyond the control of the market with the current situation that we're facing. So with that in mind, what practical tips can you give in terms of how that can be best be managed? I'd like to jump in on that one, anybody?
I guess looking at the longer term picture and with that unknown demand, we always need to be looking, and that forecasting piece, we've always looked back. I've worked in some very big markets in Europe when we wouldn't just look at this year, we'd look at the past 2 or even 3 years when we're looking at our trends. Now that's completely off the table. It's more sort of that micro trends of what's happening in the last few days, weeks to capitalise on that and move forward.
Very good. Anybody else, guys, have any tips we could share there?
I think for thinking about a vendor like Sabre, what I'm doing is keeping close to the customers.
Yes.
And I think I know sentiment and feeling are really driving what people are doing. And imagine being in an industry, which is shocking actually, our industry, which to some people is going to be harmful to their health. So reacting and understanding how people feel and how that is changing. And we'll all remember how we felt in March when it all hit and how we were personally worried about our family. I've got family in the UK, I've got family in the UK, older parents. So all of a sudden work wasn't top of mind. It really wasn't about 6 months down the road, what's the business going to be like, are my parents going to be okay? And am I at risk of passing something on to somebody else? So understanding and recognizing that that's what's driving people's behavior.
Absolutely.
And the fact that our offices are closed now till the end of the year. So there's things that I cannot do with the best will in the world. I would love to stay in corporate hotels. I would love to go out and stay at the New Crown. And it'd be awesome. But actually, this is the first hotel I've been in since February.
Yes.
Which again, for somebody who's been in hotels for 30 years, that is unbelievable.
Absolutely.
So I said to Jerome, I wasn't going to say unprecedented, but here I am saying unprecedented. We are in unprecedented times, and I think our job is to be really understanding of the customers and how they feel and why they do what they do. And we obviously can and should be empathizing with them.
Absolutely.
And I'm telling my guys, as a vendor, of course, we're in sales and we want to sell, but this is not the time to sell.
Yes.
This is not the time to push. This is not the time to try and drive profits. Obviously, we're driving profit. We want to do that, but it's really understanding where the customers are at and how can we help and support in what they want to do.
Yeah, it's very much a delicate path to navigate. Absolutely. And I just did want to touch on with what Mandy was saying. Absolutely, looking at recently weighted information, and certainly if you have automated solutions that assist you, we know historical is not really of any use right now, but making sure algorithms are changed and looking at more recently weighted information as well as real-time analytics that we've got access to. And that discussion is more important now. We've always spoken about it, how that collaborative approach between revenue management and sales and all the people, but now those conversations and the information people can bring to the table is certainly up there in the things that are going to help people be able to make better decisions in this time. All right, so what interesting observations have you made so far in terms of uptake to certain campaigns, who is booking and coming in to stay? And who's travelling, and what about their expectations and things? Have you had any feedback on that?
Yeah, so in my position, obviously I've been very close to both the customer and obviously setting up the campaigns as well. And what we found is that originally it was all about the kind of long stay, and lucky enough for me, my property is apartment style, so we were set up perfectly for people that needed a home for weeks or even months. We still have some people that have been there for a very long time. So it was all about the kind of long term, getting the the cheap or very highly discounted rates out there, getting those campaigns. We all saw percentage off discounts. That was what was attracting the guests to come and stay at your property over maybe another one. But we've kind of recent, since we've kind of had lessening of the restrictions, I've kind of seen in New South Wales the whole staycation, and I'm sure you all have seen it as well.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of advertising, and we're all trying to one out each other to try and get that business. And from my perspective is not only are staycations now weekend driven, there's a lot of midweek staycations. Because a lot of people are working from home. They might even be combining their work and staying in a hotel just to get out of the house and then getting to enjoy the rest of the facilities of the hotel. I've seen some guests come and stay with us over a couple of months. They might have stayed, 3 or 4 times, for birthdays, anniversaries, any kind of occasion. Just let's get the kids out and stay in a hotel. Just anything that's getting them out of their current home, and it's very, very price and value driven. They want to see the value in everything that they're doing when it comes to booking a hotel room. If there's no value, they won't stay. They'll just stay with your neighbour, as in another hotel.
Interesting. And that's the thing, everything has changed and is likely, well, if it hasn't already, it will, to change. And that's things like the booking pace. So obviously how far out, that lead time where people were booking, how long they're staying for, your approach to distribution, feeder markets, even your competitive set, is all mixed up as well at the moment. So I've often heard it mentioned, that currently we should, approach it with a pre-opening hotel mindset, where there's really no measures and benchmarks as such, and you have to trust your strategy and that informed human, assumption and opinion and discussion to help hold firm on those strategies. For anyone that's experienced pre-opening and things like that, would you agree, and what nuances do you think exist with the current situation?
Yeah, so we did just do a pre-opening during during COVID, which sounds a little strange. While everyone was closing, we were opening, and first I kind of thought that my property was different because I am setting everything up from scratch. But then I soon realised that my colleagues within our hotel group were actually kind of doing the same thing, because everything went back to basics. Competitive set, because hotels were closing, it meant that who are now our new competitors? Yeah. So we kind of all went back to basics and started looking at who's trying to steal our market share. The window of lead time, it reduced, and it still has. It's maybe 3 days out, maybe even same day. I know I get an enormous pickup on same day. It's kind of unheard of. I used to get upset that it used to be a 2-week booking window, and now we're down to 3 or same day.
Dream about that.
Yeah, I wish. But even distribution channels, you're deciding who's actually producing and who's not. Should we even bother with some of the channels? So it's just really getting back to basics with a creative mindset and really reassessing everything from scratch, because what you used to do yesterday is certainly not what you do today. And I think if you don't adapt, I think you'll be left behind.
I think there certainly are some comparables between a new opening and where we are now. But for me, the main difference is there are, of course, targets when you have a new opening. Money's being spent. There are objectives that are anticipated to be met. What the difference is, you're entering an established market, so you need to work hard to win those customers as a newcomer to the market. They're quite comfortable of staying where they are. However, everybody at the moment is on a level playing field, with the exception of a new opening, of course, where you're doing it even tougher. We're all still fighting for the same customers, but we've already got some of those relationships in place. So it's slightly different than a new opening in that perspective, from my experience. I think where I've also come in a little bit differently, I've only recently arrived. Time does march on, but I arrived in the country in December, started here in June, so I didn't have any of those sort of preconceived ideas of what the market would do. So in a way, I think I'm kind of new opening and new country all in one has been a natural benefit for myself.
And obviously, you know, interesting correlation with the sort of those last-minute bookings in line with, you know, announcements in terms of cases and things like that, and how that fluctuates and how that impacts, those booking patterns.
I find it thinking about. I've been here for 7 years, and I can't believe how familiar I am with Daniel Andrews and Anastasia and Gladys, and the power that they have now. They make everybody's waiting for the announcement on the Sunday and then make a decision based on that announcement. And which again, I'm sure in 5 years, 10 years time, when we look back on this time, we'll think, oh my gosh, that was crazy. Remember when Scott first started the announcements a few months ago, and the massive impact that I had on the business and the lead times and whether people are going to book on that, etc. So being able to look at what's really driving and the size of the impact of those decisions is huge for us.
That's right, and that with the weekend traffic, because people can just you need to take those short breaks, and so, you know, I know I've heard of people, obviously there's been an increase in that area as well. So some of our optimisation strategies that we would use in normal times link price to varying terms and conditions to allow us to tap into a wider pool of market demand and sort of link that around people's needs and wants. Given that the situation is making everything flexibility, you know, to gain people's trust and to capture that share of the market, how do you think that can affect our optimisation strategies over the longer term, and can it be hard to go back?
I think there's a place for sort of that prepaid business, not potentially now, but in the longer term, I think we will move back to that. But because people don't really have that same level of control over whether they go or not, unless they're staying within their own state at the moment, there isn't that appetite to book somewhere further afield and not be in control of their own destiny of whether they can go or not. So I agree, that's certainly not there. Given the longer term picture, and as Philip just said, with announcements happening on a Sunday of when you can and can't go, that I think that will come back. However, I feel that the incentive is going to have to be greater to get people to lock in and spend their money up front and have that risk of that opportunity to go being taken away from them, because not just within this country, but also if we want to travel further afield, we don't know what the restrictions are going to be on terms of coming back or even going to those countries. So I think to make people part with their money and then have that potential risk of losing it, that discount percentage will need to be a lot greater than that has been in the past to get people to buy in.
And how about, did you
I think that there's been a whole change in mindset in relation to our terms and conditions. We, you know, if we make them too strict like we used to, I think that we are potentially just going to lose our customer and they're just going to go somewhere else that has flexibility. I know that even personally as a customer myself, when I'm booking now, I want that flexibility. I don't want to lose my money. I don't know, I can't predict what's going to happen. So if you don't flex with your customer, and maybe instead of black and white now, there's a lot of grey in everything, I think that you will lose out in business. I think you need to really reassure your guests that you can take the reservation and, you know, they still should book. And then if it comes to the time where they might need to cancel, don't cancel. Just change your dates. We can still look after you, and that way then we're still capturing the business.
Good. And of course you can still do varied pricing, like policy pricing, where you offer, you know, slightly higher price to give them more and slightly less for them to sort of give up something. You know, there's still scope for those sorts of measures, but in terms of, your cancellation policies and all those types of things, they certainly do need to be reviewed and flexed, and like you say, try not to cancel but shift and give other options. Excellent. All right, so it was recently forecasted by industry leaders that the recovery in the regions is going to be faster than the cities, which we know, but you know, they were anticipating they would be back at about 50% of 2019 levels by the end of this year, so by the end of 2020. How do you feel about that? I guess, you know, obviously city hotels that aren't part of the hotel quarantine program are certainly have a much tougher road ahead. So do you have any opinions on that when international, you know, corporate group conferencing, all those major segments that support CBD hotels in particular are really hardly hit at the moment?
Yeah, like in the CBD hotels, there's obviously a downturn. Everybody said it yesterday in the sessions as well, that the demand for corporate business groups is not where it has been in the past. That said, there will be an appetite for that to come back, and the success, I think, of this event and the hybrid meeting, I think this will pave the way forward as well. It's certainly in our industry and show our industry peers of what can be achieved, and we can all push forward with that. On the flip side, the staycation piece, the CBD hotels are performing well at weekends, even extended weekends to some degree as well. And also there is an appetite for F&B spending on property from locals, so we need to engage with the local community as well and encourage people into the doors. As Philip said, he's not been in a hotel, which is terrible news, since February. And we need to encourage that in our local communities as well, and not just be seen as a place that people come to, but as a community destination.
Very good. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was talking to one of our clients yesterday, and they were talking about regional versus CBD, and in some of the regions, I think it was Perth and Macquarie, they're ahead of where they were last year, which is phenomenal. Yeah. Not enough to offset, it's a big change, it's not enough to offset the downturn in the CBD, so clearly some of the regions are doing well. CBD is a lot tougher, clearly. And you talked to Felicity earlier, we were just saying that, yeah, there's nothing we won't do. There's no stone that we can't turn over in terms of looking at how we get that business, whether it be offering packages to parents to get away from the kids. I mean, we love our kids, right? But, and really understanding that, yeah, there's going to be that, we're all feeling a little stir crazy, those of us who are working from home a lot, so there's that escape element that we want, and a hotel, even if it's around the corner, can be really attractive if it's got the spa package and a luxury dinner, and that could be a really great way to drive some business, and staycations obviously as well, which is booming.
And of course, the question comes up with a lot of properties with virtually zero marketing budget or very limited. Then, how can they drive the most conversions at the smallest amount of cost and the smallest amount of increase in marketing spend? It's really challenging. Obviously, we know our third-party distribution partners will, obviously have to aid and assist the recovery, but in terms of other avenues that properties can take when their own marketing budgets are going to be very small, if not zero, for some time. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that first of all, with your online travel agents, it's about, yes, highlighting your property, but also making sure that you have the upper hand with the online travel agents. So making sure that you're presented well and everything like that, but making sure that you have rate parity, because there's a lot of kind of sneaky business happening at the moment, and furthermore, your website as well, making sure your website is competitive, not only in price, but also attractive, user-friendly, all of those things that you need to highlight. But then moving into your actual hotel and, coming from a rooms background, I always sing the praise of the people that answer the phones and reply on emails. So your front office or your reservations team. So many hotels, from my experience as a customer, I go into and I say, oh, I saw a rate online, and how many times will they match price? So I think it's about teaching your frontline staff, making sure they're empowered, they're educated. They know that every time that phone rings and someone offers you an opportunity to compete for the business that might go somewhere else, is that they need to be able to secure it. So it's been great for us with pre-opening, because I've spent a lot of time in training and teaching them about my property, but I've also taught my team about the fundamentals of what I believe in, which is making sure they know that what commissions cost, and by not taking that reservation and matching price, not only are you losing the opportunity at the pre-arrival experience, the upsell, the value adds, and just the experience in general for your guest to speak to someone, is if they go back to the online travel agent, who knows if they're actually going to book your hotel or whether they start to shop again.
That's it. And sorry, did you have anything to add to that one?
No, I agree. I think it's that communication with the customer which is key. Once, yes, invariably customers will go to an OTA to do that shopping piece, but we need to get them to convert with us, and luckily, still quite a lot of people pick up the phone here, which I'm surprised about. In Europe, it's unheard of. Nobody uses the phone for anything. But and that conversion piece is key. Yes, I've seen it online, and offering something including breakfast or a nominal discount to get them to convert over the phone, and that's key with the properties doing that. But also then, if people do book through an OTA, making sure we're collecting their data on arrival, get their email address, get their phone number, and start that conversation, share our social channels with them as well, so that we can then converse directly with the customer and get them to think of us rather than the OTA in the first instance.
And that actually just will make me just sort of jump to the topic of training, as you've mentioned it in there actually, because training is always so important, just purely also through that flow-on effect to retention and then profits as well. In normal times, it is something that can sometimes get pushed to the wayside or even cut from budgets and things, but it's just so important to employee well-being, retention, and the profits of your business. And in the pandemic, we have seen that increase in people upskilling and training, one, because they have just more time on their hands, and two, because of that uncertainty with their careers. Now, you're actually a student, you've completed the Graduate Certificate of Revenue Management with Torrens, and I know you're alumni of Blue Mountains as well. So did you have any extra thoughts you might share on the benefits and value those sorts of courses have brought you in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that by actually undertaking that course, obviously I do all of that in my day-to-day roles, but what it meant is that I felt a lot of confidence in myself. Everything that I'd been doing on the job, I felt like it was truly confirmed that procedures and ideas and things like that were true to revenue management. And not only did it give me a sense of confidence in doing the course, it actually created a confidence in the managers and my owners that when I was on the course, they knew that I was learning everything I could do about revenue management, which meant it was a win for them and a win for me, because it meant that I could maximise, obviously, revenue, because doing the course made me also open my eyes to other interesting things that were happening in market at the moment. I know that we spoke about relevant topics that were happening. It also moved revenue management, not just in the mindset of hotels, but we discussed items about other businesses and how they do revenue management. And to be honest, I never thought about that before. But it was a great thing to have that behind me, and simple life skills. It taught me about time management and getting back to due deadlines and assignments and things like that, which is a great mindset, because I know as hoteliers we don't have much time, and just to get back into kind of the motion of being responsible for the limited time that you have was another great thing that came from the course.
Excellent, good, thank you. All right, well, now I'm going to just touch on a bit of digital marketing and talk about funnel strategies, which is a key component of a successful digital marketing strategy, and it's hand in hand with revenue management and everything we're trying to achieve. The funnel strategy looks at different stages of the purchasing journey of the customer, from an awareness stage down to sort of hot leads more at the bottom of the funnel. I'm just wondering, Philip, you can explain a little bit more about this for us, but is there a change in the recommended approach as to where you should be sort of targeting more of your efforts as opposed to, now as opposed to in normal market stability?
Well, Bill, you've already alluded to the change is that budgets are restricted. Everybody's holding onto the hats, and the phrase I'm hearing a lot is we're just keeping the lights on. We're just trying to get through this next phase. And so we are seeing a change in that focus from awareness, SEO, non-branded PPC, etc., down to influence, branded PPC, remarketing, and then down to converts, the bottom end, the key end, right? The hotter end, the hotter leads. So I like hotter, sounds much better. our advice, our team's advice to clients is to, clearly if you are a branded hotel, then that awareness piece is less important right now, and maybe it is really about getting to the conversion and making sure that you're getting those people who are thinking or close to booking. And one of the things we talk about is remarketing to those that have been on your booking engine but didn't book. Mm-hmm. So get very specific about the market, the audience that you're targeting, and get them. And so we are seeing clients that are reducing their budget but shifting the focus and also doing shorter campaigns.
Yep.
And again, as we've talked about already, in terms of the way things are changing so quickly. So whereas before it was a 6 months set and forget campaign, now it's let's look at this every month. Let's have a conversation where we're changing. It's interesting because we're a Dallas-based company, so trying to explain to the teams in the US that the borders, because they see Australia as one country, which it is one country. But for those of you who come, we really realize it really is in some ways very separate. So explaining that when Melbourne closed, that has a huge impact on Sydney. And so we're going to have to be very, very targeted about this. So it's not just domestic, because we want closer than just domestic. We want it more targeted than just domestic. We want New South Wales, because Melbourne can't come here, so there's no point targeting Melbourne if they can't actually come. But at the same time, we know that people are still looking and still dreaming and thinking about next year, etc. I was laughing because in February I got engaged, and we had a great, fantastic plan of getting married in Lake Como in September. It is now September, and there is zero chance of that happening. However, we are still looking. So although in February, March, I was at the point of converting, I've gone back up the funnel, but I still need the hotels. The property still needs to be there, because when I do book, whenever that may be, I'm going to want to know the right information. So our advice certainly is don't cut, don't think longer term. And we had a call with our CEO in Dallas, and his message was, travel is going to return. That is absolutely a known. When? Less certain, but it is going to return. So this period now, as we get settled into having been in lockdown, not lockdown, being in isolation, etc., for 6 months, and settled in that now, we know that, okay, we are where we are, but how do we prepare for when it comes back? And those that are best prepared are going to be able to take advantage.
And what about the audience personas that you would try and target? Have you got any feedback or seen any changes there, or different approaches?
Yeah, of course, those have changed as well. So I was looking at a presentation that we did last year on the personas, and we had about 12 different personas, and there was experience seeker, and there was adventure, and there was a family vacationer, and there was a business, and there was event. All of those are shrunk into one persona almost. If I can travel, will I travel? And so that has definitely changed, and as Felicity was talking about, the lead time has shrunk dramatically. So again, being much more targeted and focused on who you are, and recognizing that what happened yesterday is not relevant today. It may well come back in 6 months' time and be relevant, so it's important to think about that. But being flexible in your thinking and your marketing is really important. Which is why revenue management becomes so important, because it's not just the same old, we've done this before, we'll do this again. Being creative and nimble is going to be key to any success.
And trying to get those emails now of people in a way, that if properties are still able to at least get an email opt-in from someone to give them something useful, so they can keep trying to build that database and market to them for when things do, return as well. I know a lot of companies, their databases are all muddled up now, because there's been so much shift and displacement of people and career changes and things. So a lot of webinars and things people are doing are helpful, but it's also a way for them to keep their databases as current as possible, and to make sure that their emails are accurate, so then they can market to them when the time is right. So good. Now, also, Philip, I'll let you off the hook in just a minute, but one of your Sabre colleagues at the Revenue Management Summit recently spoke about selling your way out of recovery, although we have touched on it is a sensitive definitely needs, it's a sensitive area at the moment and needs the correct approach around it. But you can't cut your way out of it. So can you just explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects really, and it's about, one is customers are not as sensitive to price as they used to be, because if they can't travel, they just can't travel. So when I was in a revenue management company, we talked about price being inelastic to some degree. So being creative about adding value, which we were talking about, and the bundles that you create to sell your way out of that is a really important way. It's much easier to create a bundle now and in 6 months, 12 months time, reduce a bundle than it is to reduce the price now and then try to put it back up in 6 months' time. We know that's a recipe for disaster. So you flag to the market your real value if you reduce your price right now. So that's one aspect. And the other is investing. We talk about investing in your people.
Yes.
We are at the moment writing training programs for our teams as well. I've got a call tomorrow to write some more materials. So it's that we are here for the long term, and the phrase knee-jerk reaction, which is what we want to avoid. I think about some of the, I might show my age a little bit. I remember it's the first Iraq War in 1990, and the knee-jerk reaction to that business would never come again. I was working in a big hotel in London, and we saw occupancy disappear literally overnight because no Americans travelled after the war started. Got rid of all the staff, changed everything, and then in 2 months' time had to try and get everybody back because it all came back pretty quickly. This is different, but it is going to return. So thinking long term rather than short term is challenging. I recognise that, because the reality is the reality, right? But trying to think as long term as possible.
Yes.
Keeping that front of mind, because as I said, travel will return.
Good. All right, well, we're just about wrapping up, guys. So to finish the session, I just would like to have each of you share your tip for long-term survival. What's your top tip? Felicity?
I think it's probably stay flexible and probably look at the bigger picture. Yeah.
Good.
You stole mine. I can't. That is so disappointing.
You stole mine.
That
You
is
can't
so
say that.
disappointing.
The seed
I told you not to tell them.
You've already given us heaps.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think prepare for the worst and hope for the best. I think it is relevant as well. We know that it's tough out there. That's the reality. So think about it. But let's hope that it gets better then, and be ready for that.
Excellent. And Mandy?
I was talking to my colleague about this earlier in the week, and his suggestion was to drink less. That helps long-term survival. But no,
Maybe not when we're doing our
in a business sense, I guess, is keep trying. Try new things, adapt them and improve them, and don't be set in what has worked or hasn't worked in the past. Keep nimble and looking for that next opportunity.
Excellent. So there's no correct answers, really, as we all know, to these hard decisions that we have to make. But I think you've shared some excellent tips today. And keep open-minded, stay nimble, that's right, and just rethink, I think, your success measures. And also keep learning and keep training your staff. Thank you, everyone, and thanks again to the panellists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The answers to the quiz are up there now if you wanted to quickly mark those off. And I think we're done.
Echoing in my mind.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of AHICE. A little bit thinner in the room today, so I assume you're all online. And it was a great day yesterday for those of you that were here, and I'm sure it'll be great again today. I would first, though, like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which this hotel stands. Sydney is Australia's largest city, both in size and population, and residents known as Sydneysiders. and Sydney offers you a wealth of diverse and accessible Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander experiences. I'd also like to recognise the Encore guys in the back of the room and at the side of me. They've been terrific help with Encore's Chime Live. If you haven't got their app, sorry, not their app, but their website, do it now, because you'll get the program, you get all the speakers' bios, you get everything you need to know about this conference. And the Encore is continuing to support our hotel partners throughout Asia Pacific and this hybrid solution. I've understood this is the first time this has happened maybe in Sydney, and certainly this is the biggest conference that this hotel has had since March. So this is really the start of something new that HM Magazine and the Intermedia Group have put together for sure. Look, one other thing, AHB are auctioning a bed out there, a silent auction bed, the proceeds of which go to Beyond Blue. I just put a bid in for $500. Surely one of you can top that. It's a $3,000 bed. You could take it back to Canberra. Okay, but honest to God, it's a serious setup, and the proceeds AHB are going to send to Beyond Blue, and in this day and age, we really need that. Intrust Super and Host Plus, also our key sponsors, as you know. We're going to be talking with them throughout the day as well. They've been with us since the inception, I think, of AHICE, and very valuable partners of our industry. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome up James Wilkinson, Editor-in-Chief of HM Magazine, among many other things, and also Heidi Kunkel, who's the VP Hilton Australasia. Welcome, Heidi.
Thanks, Howard. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Heidi, for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, James. Absolute pleasure to be here. And congratulations on the organisation for this event. It's wonderful to be back here and to be with people. Yesterday was a fabulous day, and it's just wonderful to be back in reconnecting with people after such a long period of time. So congratulations on the incredible work.
I think showing how to do events, I think, in a COVID-safe environment, I think is a bit of a key. And I think the more governments that can see that's how you can do events going forward.
Yeah.
Have you, from an event standpoint, what have you seen with Hilton in terms of, are people starting to rebook again or revisit their bookings that they had postponed to later this year, and what kind of formats are you seeing them book?
I mean, you're right. The big box hotels in Sydney, for example, have been obviously most impacted because they're the ones that have got large conference space, like the Hyatt Regency here, and that's where they suffer the most. Having large space, it's very difficult to sort of adapt this space if you don't host it for what it's designed for. We did see, forward bookings when there was initially the government announcements. Obviously, there was cancellations in the beginning, postponement of some, and people then just not willing to rebook until they've got clarification really around the government decisions and the government restrictions. So we're really following very much around the announcements that were coming out by state. So it was really to see what was happening on a state-by-state basis as there were restrictions opening up, and what was really depending on what were the limitations that were there. We had some postponed, some cancelled until they got clarification on that. And we do see some bookings that are coming back, but it's more for 2021.
Obviously tricky with different states having different rules in terms of how you can conference. I mean, in some states we could have had 500 people in this room, but in this state we're allowed 150. Others were not allowed any, others were allowed 50. New Zealand, I think, is on 10 still. So it is extremely different. So across your network of what you look after, it's obviously quite a challenge then in terms of having case-by-case basis.
That was part of the complexity across my area, we look at Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Bora Bora, French Polynesia, Papua New Guinea. And there was different regulations for different countries, and then within New Zealand obviously had their regulations in place, and then depending upon the states across Australia, each had their different announcements coming out and different restrictions. So we had to do the best to be able to follow those and obviously respect them completely. And our teams were then, I mean, the teams did a phenomenal job. Our general managers working very closely with our owners in close collaboration to be able to see where we could adapt things. But obviously we didn't have a lot of group bookings, so it was more about just respecting the fact from food and beverage what we needed to do to be able to keep people safe, keep our team members safe, keep our guests safe, and where we had guests, obviously. And now we've got a couple of hotels which have got isolation business, and they're following very, very strictly within the the guidelines to keep people safe and secure.
I mean, this state has seemed to have done an extremely good job when it does come to the isolation business. And Hilton, I remember being one of the first ones, because one of my friends actually was one of the first guests to stay there when the quarantine system came in place. So obviously managed extremely well in this state, hasn't it? It
was managed incredibly well. The teams did a phenomenal job, and they're still doing a fantastic job with very strong support from our owners. And it's a team effort. My regional team as well, who's here as well, have done a fantastic job to give out support. So it's absolutely teamwork, but it's absolutely critical that we are protecting, keeping people safe. That's the most important thing. Is Hilton takes that very, very seriously to make sure that we do have very strict protocols, that we're respecting obviously the guidelines, as I said, set by the government. But we want to, most importantly, is to be able to build that trust with people, and then create whatever you can, some kind of hospitality experience, which is what they've done incredibly well at Hilton Sydney, is to be able to provide the food and beverage that they're providing, and the guest feedback that they're receiving is very, very positive.
And when it comes to your region looking after French Polynesia, I'm not sure if everyone knows about this, but they were the first in South Pacific to actually put in a rule about a COVID safe travel rule, where you had to have a test 72 hours before you arrived, random 4-day tests afterwards. They reopened the country, I think, in July from memory.
Yes. Yeah.
What kind of feedback have you had on that?
It's been great. They had very strict, obviously being on an island, and for islands it's much trickier because they have to really be able to, isolate the island, keep people safe. So 72 hours prior to boarding, you had to have a COVID-19 test, and obviously negative, before you could get on the flight. They'd arrive into French Polynesia, and then from there they would receive a self-test kit, and within the 4 days of staying they had to do that self-test, and that was then taken back to Papeete, back to the authorities to be checked. So very, very well managed, and it at least gives an opportunity, because most of the customers coming into French Polynesia are from the west coast of the United States, and a few from Europe, but it'll be a while before we get Australians going back there.
And what kind of, have you seen some good numbers out of there in terms of from a booking standpoint?
Yeah, it was doing really well. Because it was clear about what's the guidelines, I mean, we had good levels of ramp up. Obviously it's good rates in a place like Bora Bora. And yeah, we've seen, there's a good level of confidence as long as we're, keeping people safe. And they've got to have those clear guidelines around keeping people safe.
And it's not in your region, but Hawaii has obviously been looking at doing that. We'll talk to Jeff from Outrigger shortly, from Honolulu, actually, about exactly this, because they had to postpone it back a tiny bit, but they were looking at doing the same thing. So potentially French Polynesia could be an example case of what the South Pacific can do in places like Fiji.
Yeah, sure.
For example, where the tourism industry is completely decimated.
Correct. Yeah, we've got 2 hotels there which were closed. We've now reopened them on the weekends for leisure business and only for the domestic local business, which is, I mean, again, the team's doing great work with strong support of the ownership group. But we need international travel. Fiji is very much dependent on international arrivals from Australia, from New Zealand, so we really need to be able to see that we can get to a place where there's going to be, extending on, hopefully, from the Trans-Tasman bubble, which we've all talked about at some stage, is to be able to have the bubble towards the Bulla bubble that was being talked about.
Which is probably more likely, to be honest. I mean, if you look at New Zealand going for elimination versus what Australia's doing. Yeah. Also, too, how long then, not being controversial, but how long does Fiji wait then, given that they have a lot of business from the US, a lot of business from the US East Coast, actually, out of New York and whatnot, from a honeymoon standpoint. So how long does Fiji wait? Do they just say, we'll wait for Australia, or how long do they watch French Polynesia and go, we need some travellers, let's bring some Americans in if they are COVID-free?
It's a great question, James, and I wish I knew the answer. Because it's a place where obviously it's a safe destination to go. If we could even open up for selected states that would enable from Brisbane, like from Queensland or from New South Wales, to be able to enter in there and take a similar sort of approach to French Polynesia, is to be able to have clear processes in place to be able to make sure that it is accessible. People can still enjoy their holidays, being in a great place. You're staying in a Hilton. You know that you've got clean stay programs in place. So we take the safety, security, hygiene protocols very seriously.
Now, we do talk about sort of companies growing. We spoke to a company yesterday, which was Radisson, about their phenomenal growth in the last 20 years. We've seen Hilton grow as well in the last 3 or 4 years from a signing standpoint dramatically. So tell us a bit about your growth and also bringing new brands in. I mean, obviously, DoubleTree has made it to this part of the world after a long time. You have a portfolio of many brands.
We do, yeah.
How's your growth going at the moment?
Yeah, we've got, 18 brands worldwide. We've deployed a smaller number of them, obviously, in Asia Pacific and a handful of them in Australia. 2020 was really in the line to be our most successful year, coming off the back of 2019, as you know, which was our 100th anniversary. So it was going to be a phenomenal year. We had more signings than ever before in the history in Australia. And 13 signings, 20 more hotels, deals that are underway. And my team's here as well. I know they're going to be working on more. And so we're very, very exciting. Going from Hilton in our key locations, followed up by DoubleTree, by Hilton in other locations, and then launching the Hilton Garden Inn brand in those regional locations where we know there's going to be stronger demand now, especially for the mid-scale brands, where customers are looking for great value for money, quality of product and service, with a really efficient prototype and a really efficient cost model. So we've got a lot of confidence that we're launching Hilton Garden Inn next year, first of all, in Albany in Western Australia. We've got the DoubleTree and we've got a pipeline of about probably 15 potential properties to be under the Hilton Garden Inn brand. DoubleTree, we have the DoubleTree by Hilton Waterfront in Perth, which is opening up at the end of this year, which is going to be a stunning property right on the waterfront. We've got the Hilton, DoubleTree by Hilton Karaka in New Zealand, which is going to be in the Bloodstock Sales, which is going to be a stunning property. And also the Hilton, which is opening in Melbourne in our Q1 next year. The Hilton Melbourne Little Queen Street, which is going to be a beautiful property. Heritage building, the quality and the finishes on that property is going to be absolutely stunning. So we're very much looking forward to that being open with.
What's the timing like on that property now?
It's been pushed back. It was normally going to be the end of this year, and we're looking at Q1 next year.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously with the restrictions in place.
A bit trickier, obviously, in Victoria with those restrictions. But in terms of, from a Hilton standpoint, it's good to have another Hilton joining the family from a property standpoint. So what kind of demand are you getting for the Hilton master brand at the moment? We talk about Garden Inn and DoubleTree, but what kind of demand for Hilton itself?
Great. I mean, there's always going to be consistent demand, given that, you know, the level of awareness of Hilton, the loyalty programs that we have in place with our Hilton Honours loyalty members. There's always a strong level of demand. Obviously, now there's an impact because of the context that we're currently in. But we're very confident, especially in a location like Melbourne, where we have absolute confidence that it's been a little while that we've been out of the Melbourne market with a Hilton flag. We've got the DoubleTree by Hilton Melbourne in Flinders Street, and that does extremely well. And very, very much looking forward to having the Hilton flag back in Melbourne.
And obviously, you know, a new owner in recent terms, in terms of the Gold Coast, Jerry buying that.
Yes. Yeah.
And renovating it as well, giving it a bit of a makeover. So what kind of feedback have you had on that, and what's the guest reaction been?
Jerry's been fantastic in investing at a time, and it's the right time to be able to invest now. So obviously when the market comes back, and a market like the Gold Coast, because it's a leisure destination, that's where we know obviously there's strong demand for leisure destinations. Other areas where we've seen strong demand, especially on the weekends. So we've had really good demand on weekends and especially because it's leisure. Strong investment that's going to be finalised very, very soon. So he's done work on investing in the rooms and the lobby area. And we're very excited to be able to have that in place so that when it does open up, and we've got not only the weekend business and the leisure business, but we'll also be able to fill much better as well during the weekdays.
And from a corporate standpoint, your CEO, Krishna Zeta, who I know very well, as you know, has done a very good job weathering the storm for the company in terms of refinancing and everything through the master business. What's it been like for you being with Hilton during something like this?
Feel very, very fortunate to work for a company like Hilton, which places such a strong focus on culture, on values, on people, on being a great place to work. And we've been recognised. Hilton was again recognised as #1 company by Forbes, Great Places to Work, because it puts such strong focus on values and taking care of people. Krishna Zeta, as you know, is is an incredible man who's very inspiring, who's focused on business and on people and creating a great culture where people feel they enjoy coming to work and they get to really have that inspiration for being, bringing themselves to work and being in a great place to work where they're valued. So that's been incredible, and that's obviously reflected right throughout the organisation, including Alan Watts and the team who very much follow on those values. So it's a great company to work for. It's not only about the business side, which is incredibly important, having great relationships with our owners, but it's also incredibly important to build a great culture for our people.
I think it's been impressive to watch. I think all the major groups in the United States who are based there actually watch how they've actually managed the pandemic for their own, looking after as many staff as possible and doing what they can. And I think, what are some of the takeaways for you then from the new normal of what we've seen? We've seen Hilton put so many stringent things in place, especially in the US and followed around the world. What are some of the new norms that we're not going to be able to get rid of, I think?
So Hilton Clean Stays obviously have been launched, and we've worked in partnership with RB, who's the makers of Dettol and Lysol, to ensure that customers feel really safe and secure. So it's really about building trust, loyalty with customers to encourage them to be able to come back and make them feel really confident when they do come back. There's going to be strong levels of hygiene in place. Operationally, team's done an incredible amount of work in the hotels, with our owners and with a regional team as well, to be able to really reset the organisation so that during the crisis in the early stages, it was really critical to focus on cash flow protection, to be able to do our best to protect team members, but also to sort of reset the organisation and reset the business. And as we had to make some really, really tough decisions with team members and as well as shutting down services, was it about saying, how can we, as we get towards a ramp up and a recovery stage, that we're able to still keep people safe, but we can't put all our costs back in, because obviously there's a concern about making sure we're able to drive the right level of rate. And if we're not able to drive the right level of rate, you've got to still have a strong focus on the break-even point and still protect cash. So there's going to be things where we need to look at P&Ls very, very closely on a very rigid basis. And a lot of it was discussed yesterday during the What Do Owners Want session, which I think was a really valuable session, and talking about putting things back in place, but very gradually, that we don't put all our cost structures back in place, that we're going to need to be looking at new ways of doing things, new digital innovations, adapting our services to still provide a level of service and innovation for our customers, but we're still going to need to be very, very much focused on a bottom line.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Heidi, and thank you for your support of AHICE again, and looking forward to 2021 coming up.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you to you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Heidi. We're now going to dial in up to Brisbane and chat with Brendan O'Farrell. Brendan, are you on the line? There he is. I thought Brendan was going to give us a tropical backdrop, but we're not getting a tropical backdrop today of sand and surf and sun.
Hello.
Are you there, Brendan? We got you?
Yeah, yep. Oh, I got you now, yep.
I thought you were going to give us a beach backdrop from one of your recent Gold Coast escapes, but we've got you in a tie in the office.
You got me in a tie in the office today, James, so I think I know where I'd prefer to be, and probably lucky enough to be in Queensland to be able to still do that, so yeah.
Well, mate, thank you so much for your wonderful support again of AHICE and helping it make it happen this year, which has been incredible. Mate, certainly some interesting times. I really want to sort of ask you about a service and the challenges of service during COVID, and I guess what kind of things have you taken away from that in terms of the new norm for you and everyone at Intrust?
Yeah, I suppose it's service is one of our key philosophies and objectives, and to be able to support our clients through that tough period has been very important to us, and it's been important to themselves too. So it's to be able to change our whole service delivery has been what has been key to us. Being able to meet face to face has been part of the old service way, and to be able to deliver things now through digital websites, webinars, etc., to help employers with their staff, just to continue that engagement is what has been key. It's been tough. I suppose what it's done is for a lot of businesses, it's actually brought forward a lot of their strategies, what people probably had in plan for the next 2 and 3 years, and has actually brought that forward to happen overnight. So, the team here has done a wonderful job in making that happen.
Now, when it comes to, I guess, one of the bigger issues at the moment, the release of super, obviously we've known a lot about that. We know a lot of people who've done that, have taken the $10,000 out. What are your thoughts on this, on the program itself, and what kind of impact has it had on your business?
Yeah, the $10,000. I mean, that was a bit of a surprise to everyone. It was a surprise to our whole industry. And that happened overnight. So we had to turn our systems upside down basically within 24 to 48 hours. What we established from that, there's a lot of people out there hurting, a lot of people that needed that support. So from that basis, we have no problems at all supporting those individuals that were in need at that time. There's a lot of them out there, and a lot of our clients in the audience today would have had those discussions, standing down people over that period of time, and those people needed that support. So our primary job was to make sure that we could facilitate that. Whether I think it's a good policy or not is probably another thing. What's probably a little bit disappointing is what you see what some of the things that people are using this money for, which is not the purpose. There's a lot of people out there that do need it, but when things start popping up on Facebook pages of new furniture and new cars and that, it's not for that purpose, and that's probably the disappointing thing. We've had about 20% of our membership utilise this facility, and probably about 10% of funds under management have gone out the door through this mechanism. So from that point of view, I can see what the government's trying to stimulate the economy, which it has. I think overall, the industry-wide value is probably somewhere $1 billion, which has gone out of the industry. So that's a big stimulus that's been put into the economy through that mechanism.
And what kind of impact do you think COVID and the early release is having on your investment strategy? Obviously, it's got to change your investment strategy dramatically, Brendan. When like you said, 10% is coming out of funds already. So we're talking, did you have to rework your strategy at any point in time, or did you just have to readapt it, or what did you do?
I probably say rework it. I mean, there's a lot of commentary around, which I think was pretty ill-founded actually, around liquidity. There's a lot of commentary in the media, the written media, about funds having liquidity issues, etc. I truly don't believe any funds had any liquidity issues, which is a good thing. But what it actually does do is that no one expects a government to open up a super fund like an ATM, right? We all have our long-term investment strategies in place. So we all had to have obviously a certain amount of cash and bonds, etc., a certain amount of liquidity to pay this money out. So what this will probably mean going forward is that we have to assume that at any point in time that there will be some sort of policy going forward that may see this occur again. So for us to be prepared for that, we're obviously going to have to carry a lot more probably cash and liquidity around, which will obviously have a longer term impact on performance going forward. And that's probably the disappointing thing about this policy, is that I believe it will have a long-term impact on investment performance across the majority of funds. But from a liquidity issue, as I said, I don't think any fund had any real problem. I think it was all a bit of a media beat up, which was probably disappointing and put a lot of scaremonger into the community, which wasn't necessary.
If you look at investment strategies, Brendan, you've obviously gone across several industries and pillars over the years, and you've obviously had shares in some of Australia's biggest and well-known hotels, alongside a lot of commercial assets, etc., and here and around the world. What's your kind of strategy now? What kind of sectors do you like at the moment from an investment standpoint?
That's a good question, James. Diversification, I think, is probably the pitch at the moment. I mean, the markets around the world are getting a bit toppy. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world that probably hasn't really been there before. And just with all the JobKeeper and job seekers and the stimulus that's been put into the economy from there, I think there's a bit of a false dawn coming. If our markets can continue to run with all this negative press out there, that's a little bit surprising. So my gut feeling is, and the way we're positioning our portfolios are, we do have a fairly defensive portfolio at the moment, so we will be holding those defensive assets to prepare ourselves for probably some sort of drawdown over the next 6 to 12 months when this stimulus eventually comes off. And that's probably the concerning bit, I think. The impact of that could be quite sharp when that does.
So does that mean you'll have to look sort of at more international investment, or will you keep more of a local focus then in that instance?
We're shifting some of our domestic allocation into international as we speak. So I don't mind saying that. I mean, internationally, it's a bit more broader and a bit more diversified than some of our local assets. So, yep.
Yeah, and you obviously have been very bullish on commercial real estate over the years from an investment standpoint as well. And how do you see that? Where obviously there's a different world, Brendan, where a lot of offices are empty in Sydney and other cities around the world. So how do you see that from an investment standpoint? Do you think, obviously, hotels or hospitality versus commercial? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably one of the fast forwarding bit of from a real estate point of view has probably been in the retail. I mean, that's again, these sorts of shocks probably bring forward a lot of strategies. And so if you look at the retail sector where, originally I think there was around about 16% people buying online. Now that jumped 10% overnight. So there's around about 26% of the population now buying purchases online. So you really have to question about how retail assets, et cetera, are going to perform going forward. But what you'll see is that they'll still be an important part of the community. It's just a mix of those centres which will change. So instead of having, your core shopping, your core tenants in there, the mix will just change to more entertainment type mixes. So it'll still draw people to those centres, and those centres will still be profitable. It's just this dip that we're going through at the moment. The commercial assets, you're still going to need offices, you're still going to need office buildings. I think when we all get through this, you'll still have people going back into the offices. I do believe there will be a change in behaviours and the way corporates will look at this as an opportunity to reassess their workforces and reassess the space required. But also, along with COVID and the social distancing, you also need space. So again, you'll still need your commercial assets and your buildings for people to go and work. I mean, that'll always be a part of our society.
Just to get a bit of a micro perspective, you're, I think, our only Queensland dial-in over the 2 days, Brendan, so we're going to have to ask you, what's the sentiment like in Brisbane? We've had so many different reactions on border closures and openings. We're hearing about borders being closed until after elections, and including Labor Party secretaries even saying that in emails to people. So what's the sentiment like in Queensland about that closure? It's obviously having a national impact from a headline story standpoint.
Well, obviously from hospitality and tourism, it's a massive impact. I mean, I don't have to tell the audience what happened there when the borders actually, when they came down, the positive impact that happened, and then when the borders went back up, the negative impact. So it was quite dramatic. And there's a lot of talk around about 28 days, of no community transmission. If that's the case, I don't think I'll be seeing anyone in 2025. So I just don't think that's practical. I mean, there's a lot of euphoria at the moment around certain events that are happening in Queensland. Queensland seems to be operating in its own little bubble at the moment. And to be fair, you sort of get acclimatised to that a little bit to be raw. But it's not good. It's not good for the economy. It has to open up, I believe. And if it doesn't open up, you're going to find a lot more businesses run into difficulties going forward.
Obviously very tricky given you have such a large member base in Queensland, obviously, in terms of all the way from Cairns down the entire coast. So it's a challenge in North Queensland too, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, North Queensland's pretty well been decimated. I think there's a lot of issues up there. As again, it opened up, occupancy went up, borders closed, occupancy went down. I really feel for some of those people up there. They're finding it difficult, and we know that what the patronage comes from New South Wales and Victoria into those northern part of Queensland. It's a popular tourist destination for those states. So it's had a massive impact, and it's obviously had more than just economic impact. And then you start getting the social impacts, et cetera, that go forward. So I think that's more of a concern to a lot of people also, not just the economic impact. It's the safe health and safety of individuals.
Now, before we let you go, one final question, Brendan. When it comes to helping and looking after the members of the super fund, what's the number one takeaway from you during the pandemic? You think that you've done the best in terms of supporting those with their money with interest from a super standpoint?
Look, and as I've continue to tell our team here, is that you're never going to get everything right, but you've got to learn from your mistakes. And I think, as I was saying, hopefully I'm not around for the next one that comes through, because this has been devastating. It really has. But hopefully we've learnt enough to prepare ourselves for the next one, and everyone can be prepared better. But communication, it always comes back to communication, ensuring that your stakeholders, your employer base, your member base is up to date with what's happening. The early release taught us a lot. Never get in between someone and $10,000. That's all I can say. It was pretty brutal. So just communicate, let people know what's happening, let people know the processes, let them understand. That's just the most important thing, I think, from the takeaway from that. And we all think we do the right thing there and we do the best at it, but there'll always be an element of learning that will make us better going forward. And I think that's what's important.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much. Congratulations on your successes at Intrust. Be one of the best performing super funds in the country and have been for well over a decade. And thank you so much for your immense support of AHICE every year.
Great, thanks. Thanks everybody. Have a good conference.
Thanks, James and Brendan. And I'd now like to welcome Leanne Harwood with her guest, Rowan Lund, from the CEO of the NRMA. Not many people would have trouble recognising that name. Welcome, Rowan.
There's all the Detrius here. People have left notes, iPads all over the place. If somebody's missing their iPad halfway through this. Hello, everyone. I'm going to kick off today and just take a moment to introduce Rohan so that you get a sense of who we've got sitting here with us today. Rowan Lund was appointed the role of Group Chief Executive Officer of the National Roads and Motorists Association in January 2016. With an extensive background in digital technology, strategy and innovation, Rohan brings a wealth of experience delivering transformation across a range of customer-focused companies. An energetic and customer-focused leader, Rohan provides strategic and commercial expertise to NRMA, which is Australia's largest member-owned organisation, providing a range of motoring, tourism and leisure services. And I'm going to hold on that in a minute because I think there's something interesting there that not a lot of people know about NRMA. Before joining NRMA, Rowan was the Chief Operating Officer for Foxtel, Australia's largest subscription business, and his previous roles also include COO of Seven West Media, CEO of Yahoo 7, and Strategy Director for Singtel Optus. And you've also got a Master of Laws.
I do.
Very, very impressive. Rowan, can you just explain a little bit about NRMA? Because I think something that's really interesting, and you just whispered in my ear up there, was that you're actually one of the largest accommodation suppliers in the country. And I don't think people think about that when they think of NRMA.
Yeah, no, I think we use the brand predominantly in the motoring side, but people probably don't realise that, you know, through Tuckerbox with our partners at Mirvac, we own a lot of the Travelodge portfolio. You know, probably one of the largest owners of holiday parks, investor in a lot of hotel businesses, some in the room here that I recognise as well. So,
Which is fantastic. I'm going to give you just set a bit of a scene of a background here. I had the wonderful experience of following Rohan in a leadership forum last year where Rohan got up and spoke about leadership, and I have to say getting up on stage after that was a pretty tough call to follow. But what incredibly impressed me was just the irreverence that you approached your leadership, the fact that you never took a I can't do attitude and challenged your teams all the time. And I think in these times that we're in at the moment, clearly nothing's the same, nothing is what it seems, and you've been through a bit of a ride. So how are you doing it amongst all of this, and you know, how are you faring?
Well, I feel like a grown-up today, wearing a suit, getting to come into the big smoke, and it feels exciting. Well, this was meant to be our centenary year. So this NRMA started back in 1920, and we'd planned for years around what this year was going to mean. We had events planned around the country. You know, we had bands that were performing. We'd booked venues, and we were just to stimulate regional tourism was what we decided we would do for the 100th year. And then at the start of the year, with the fires we were like, okay, what's this mean? And we started looking at contingency, and then COVID came. And it was probably for the group was such a significant moment, because it was a chance for us to remind ourselves as to, you know, why we were born 100 years ago and what that meant. And just if you indulge me for a sec, the group, so the group was, we were started by a former Prime Minister at the time, C.J. Watson, and he felt that this role of government and the role of private, you know, he really thought there was a role there for the mutual, particularly which the vision was about connecting Australia and connecting regional Australia. That was the original vision. And he felt that that role was best served by a mutual. And our staff were all the returned Light Horse Brigade. And so that's why we have patrols, and we have all of our structures and disciplines and the way we talk in the business come a lot from the Light Horse Brigade.
Right.
And so when those things happened and when COVID first started, you know, I used that time, you know, and we did it as a call to arms across all of our businesses, everyone we invest in, franchisees, partners, staff, to say this moment, you know, Australia's had a few of them through the last 100 years. It's not the first time. But this is a moment where we kind of remember our purpose and why we were here. And, you know, I was quite proud looking at how the businesses responded. We had, you know, we own Thrifty, the Thrifty business, but Thrifty, who, you know, if you think of businesses impacted, airlines are pretty bad. Car rental would be not far behind airlines. But the Thrifty business allowed all the cars that they had nationally to be used for free by health workers for the period of COVID. And that for the staff was, rather than people being stood down or people not being there, it was a chance that actually they would keep working and keep being purposeful. There's not much money in it when you're giving the cars away for free, but as a way for us to maintain our model, maintain our staff, maintain our structures, people were still purposeful. Hotels, holiday parks, you know, we were taking anyone displaced, homeless people, we were taking into accommodation. We started all of our patrols and any staff, any people, we run the ferries, the fast ferries on the harbour, but all of those staff were doing Meals on Wheels. Call centres were calling people, you know, at home. Anyone in quarantine would have got a call from one of our staff. And so it was something, kept people purposeful, made people kind of proud to do what they do. And so and for us, it wasn't the centenary we'd planned, but probably the one we were meant to have.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah,
no, and you've certainly, it sounds like you've taken and made the most out of this opportunity. And we talked a little bit earlier about how critical it is to have a values-based organisation. And during these times, we take them all back to purpose, right? And purpose leadership and how you come through that. So let's face it, our industry at the moment, certainly from the hospitality industry, has been beaten up, you know, across the board in the media. And yet, as you say, you know, we've been going out and doing all these amazing things, you know, helping the communities and certainly leaning into them. So not an easy situation. Your background obviously is a bit of that media side of media with all your expertise. How have you kind of leant into that and ensured that your teams are a little bit protected from that and help them through it?
I think we, you know, we have a pretty simple playbook that the organisation uses. So any business, anyone who works in our group or works with us, the playbook is essentially, you know, everything's about people. There's a humanity to what we want all staff to do, but the humanity goes both ways to our customers. And, you know, and you and I have talked about this before, the way the staff, they don't see customers or resources, they see a person when you know, and you'll feel that hopefully on the side of the road if someone stops. But that also means the way we look after our staff is remembering that they're people. So that, you know, giving them the security or comfort that we would be able to see them through whatever this is and however long this goes. But I think for me, if I look at some of the positives, and it's pretty hard to find some positives in the last period, but if you look at some of the positives, I think that access to staff, that, you know, we planned for years around contingencies and can we work from home? Can we provide a flexible environment? Manuals, and I'd seen so many risk papers on why it won't work and why we need to do it over a stage period. And then in 7 days, it's working. And it happens and there's hardly a hiccup. And I think that's powerful when you look at the organisation, but then also how you manage staff. We have layers upon layers to try and get messages out to people. And all of a sudden, you know, we're on a video every day talking to everyone in the front line and telling them this is what's happening, this is what it means, this is... And I think there was and people feeling suddenly bold enough to say, hey, Rowan, I don't agree with why you're doing this, and I think you could do it differently. And I think it was a great leveller.
Yeah.
I think it was, and for us, you know, it kind of created a different dynamic in the business, but a way of working that seemed to be faster and just, you know, and things we didn't think were possible suddenly seemed easier than they were.
It's certainly broken down barriers and the ability to move at pace, you know, because you don't have those multiple layers and people blocking things, because it's a completely different environment that we're working in now. We were talking a little bit earlier about how you do connect in with your teams, and I was saying I use Facebook Live to get to the frontline staff in a hotel, because it's almost impossible to connect in with the housekeeper in a hotel. And could you share just a little bit on those multiple platforms that you're using to connect in with your teams and stay personable, you know?
Well, and sometimes, because it's so interesting also when, you know, for that period when people were homeschooling and you're seeing kids running in front or kids running behind, and being able to see into people's lounge rooms, I think is quite a privilege too. And
absolutely.
And them seeing you normal. I had this amazing moment where there was a management meeting and someone passed a comment and talked about wearing Ugg boots during the management meeting. And then I saw 5 people, and myself included, everyone lifts up their feet and shows, no, we all wear Ugg boots. This is... Yep. I must have worn a flannel for 3 months. It was we had members of... I had a moment where I had a knock on the door and I left a meeting, you know, and I've taken this parcel at the door and I open it, and it's it was a blue flannel from one of our call centres that was saying, we're getting sick of seeing you wear the red one, so we all chipped in to get you a new shirt. And I was like, okay.
Time to change.
Yeah, no, but I think that, I mentioned the great leveller, but I do think that feeling amongst the front line that actually, you know, and it's a bit of a cliche now, but we're all in it together. Yeah. I think it has been a way where the hierarchies that once existed don't feel so real. And I think people do see a little bit more of each other, even though we're over video. And I think that has, and people are more prepared to reveal their personalities and have a joke and you know, and just have a bit of fun with each other. Yep. And I think that's special.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the reasons that I asked you to be on the stage, because, you know, when I listen to you, and certainly the TTF forums and everything else that I've interacted with you on, is being, you know, you're very approachable. And I think authenticity, and we've heard throughout today and this morning and yesterday how communication is absolutely critical, and that ability to connect with the people, because fundamentally we're leading through a crisis right now. And, you know, you've been leading through a crisis since the back end of last year when we had all of the bushfires. Leadership becomes the number one essential that are going to make the difference between whether companies see out the other end or not, right? And what's been your biggest challenge, and what do you think you've changed as a leader or adapted?
Probably even before and as we entered it, I would have, you know, you don't like to describe yourself as autocratic, but decision making was very centralised. Yeah. I think for me as a leader, and what I've realised over the last 6 months, is the best decisions are the ones that are made in real time on the ground by good people. Yep. And so that empowering of decision making, I think, you know, I've had to think through a lot of our structures, our DOAs, the way we coach, train, that actually best decisions are definitely for us happening out the front. A lot of the decisions that we've made behind the scenes have proven to be wrong, and people have had to cover for us very quickly. So I definitely think that you know, it's a more empowerment of the front line, and realising, you know, the guy who drives a van for us and wears our uniform, he's been doing it for a long time, and he knows what to do. Yeah. And the people who are in the hotels and someone on the desk or in the room, they know what to do.
Absolutely.
And I think there's an arrogance sometimes that we think we might know better from where we sit. So I think that's been a big shift for me in my style too.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. You're absolutely, you mentioned, you know, you go on the road, that's helping the road warriors as they go out there. Let's face it, right now, fundamentally all we've got is road warriors out there going to visit our hotels. You know, you've got a strong membership base, you've got hotels in the regions and the holiday parks. You know, how are you faring and what's your customer base looking like now? Has it changed? You know, do they have stronger expectations?
Yeah, so for us, in fact, you know, across our group, and that's the benefit of being quite a large conglomerate, we have some businesses that are very strong at the moment, some are just, you know, you probably prefer not to talk about it. I'll save those for briefing the board on some of those. But I think what we've seen is, you know, across the businesses, it's the member base has actually grown through this period, and that's that sense of assurance. People want and need their cars right now, and so that's given us a surge on that side. Domestic tourism, holiday parks are flying. Like holiday parks, you know, we're going to be well up year on year, and I think anyone across that sector will see that. Regional hotels, very strong. City, not so much. And so it's just a bit of a blend. Borders have a huge impact, but a lot of it's just confidence for us. It's as people have the confidence to step outside again, the weather changing. You know, I noticed the ferries, we saw like a 40% increase in the last 2 weeks of people catching the boats, and you've got to believe that's, you know, you get a ray of sunshine and people have got a spring in their step and people start catching boats back to work. And so it's a little bit of that happening, and, you know, a bit of patience. I think this is going to be up and down for a long time yet. And just the team's just being patient and knowing there'll be a new normal. It won't be the same probably, but it'll be better than today.
Has to be. We have to come out of this stronger and better than we went into it, right? You know, I'm one of those people that take the fast ferry when I'm in the office and get on there in the mornings with everybody else. And I have to say, you know, I was at the beginning of this, I got on one of the ferries one day, and your team are just fabulous, right? They turned around and they were doing their safety checks and running through all of that. And then at the end of it, and these are the days where everybody was hoarding, right? And at the end of it, the captain or whoever does it turns around and says, and for those of you who are looking, there's a 6-pack still available of the toilet paper when you get off the other end. And the entire ferry just cracked up laughing. And it was a tense moment in those first days because we didn't know what was going on with COVID and how it all was. And I sat there and I giggled to myself and thought, yep, I've been known to use inappropriate humour, and apparently, according to my team, quite often recently to help me get through with the stressful times. What's your go-to?
No, I think it's a nice example of people bringing themselves to work, and you know, for us, you know, humanity isn't just about doing nice things all the time. It's also having a laugh, being irreverent, being who you are.
Absolutely.
And I think across all of our staff, you know, hopefully they get that sense from me. But I certainly, our business, you know, we focus a lot on trust, and trust is because you're honest, and honest means we can't script perfection, and we can just script and be good, decent people and try and do the right thing, and people will see their personalities when they do that.
I completely agree. Rohan, I have to say, it's been an absolute pleasure and a delight, and I am so grateful that you've come and joined us here on stage, and I wish you all the best for the future and supporting us on the roads and on the ferries and everywhere else. So thank you for taking the time for coming and joining us.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
What a great session. Thank you. Well done. Madam. Oh, that was such a good session, wasn't it? Just before we start the next one, Claire Graham, who's the Interpoint manager of this event, has advised me that if anybody would like to bid on the AHB bed, they can email her at info@interpoint.com.au. info@interpoint.com.au. That's a bed out there. Somebody's now bid $700 on it, apparently. So it's a $3,000 bed, the proceeds of which will go to Beyond Blue. Now I'd like to welcome up, please, my panel. Please come on down. Where are you all? So Deborah Keller, who's the Hotel Investment Operations Analyst with Mirvac. Please step up. Glenn Boltwood, the CEO and co-founder of Serene Capital. Lucia Grambalova, General Manager, Hotel Investments, Malta. And a late starter, looking like Father Bob here, is Roger Powell, with the THSA Advisory. And they're going to help me talk about what owners want. Thank you for coming, Roger.
Happy to fill in for Robert.
That's okay. I guess I'm in the
late
middle.
notice.
Thank you. Oops. Jeez. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Lucia, how are you?
Thanks for having us.
Are you live? It didn't sound... Is it on? Yeah? Wasn't that interesting what Brendan Farrell said about his super fund? Did you pick up on that? Glenn, how are you? Sorry.
Yeah, look, it's interesting when I heard the announcement that the government was looking to allow people to take $10,000 out of their super accounts. First thing that came into my mind was just the long-term damage in terms of retirement savings. So, look, it's an interesting strategy, and as Brendan said, the biggest challenge super funds have had, they've got enough pressure since the GFC on liquidity. Now they've got to sit there and deal with another scenario that they never had to deal with at the moment, government intervention into withdrawals of super funds and treating it like an ATM. So from a long-term investment side of things, while I understand the rationale of the government trying to get money circulating in the economy, the impact of that is long-lasting, and I think it's. I think the damage is going to come in years' time.
I agree. I also picked up on his strategy about offshore versus domestic and how that might play out, particularly for hotels. What do you think? Anybody got a comment on that? Do you think hotels are going to become distressed assets or targets, or are we going to come out of this?
I'll give it a crack. They might. It really depends, obviously. The real estate asset class as a whole is currently being impaired by the whole market dislocation, lack of travel, border closures. Hotels are probably impacted the most because of the flexible nature. So we don't have these long-term leases in place. The banks, from a banking perspective, obviously, majority of us have some debt in our capital stack. The banks are being relatively patient at the moment. Certain banks are very patient, and they will be patient for a number of years. But there is a number of, especially local banks, who are kind of putting a little bit more focus on
tightening up.
They are tightening, and they just really would like to see faster recovery and the faster perk-up. So the question whether hotels are going to be becoming takeover targets, as we have heard yesterday from the broker panels, we are not seeing 30-40% discounts at the moment. The only reason why this would potentially happen, obviously, for the banks to start putting a greater restraints on all the covenants they are, and they are being relatively patient. So if you're going to be seeing something, it will probably happen in Q1 of next year, but I do not believe it's going to be to a larger extent.
Maybe there'll be an operator takeover.
There might be.
Yeah. That's not the duty of this panel. I thought yesterday, for those of you that picked up on it, the Nigel Greenaway's group, they brought up a few good things, and I thought I might touch on a few of these here. One of the comments was reinventing the business. Can anybody want to touch on what they're doing differently to try to get through this? Deborah, you got to...
Yeah, I think our hotels have had to adapt very quickly to this situation, and at an operational level, you know, we've seen a lot of cross-training within our departments. So we've had GMs that are now working on front desk. We've had people being retrained who were in F&B to be night auditors or to work in property operations and maintenance. So I think from that point of view, from a labour perspective,
flexibility.
It's forced flexibility, and hopefully that will continue after COVID, that the employment sort of parameters will change.
Let's hope HIGA delivers some of that. That would be what we need for at least the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. From a perspective, we sit there and we say demand's declined or fallen. And you can take a contrary view and say, well, the demand actually hasn't fundamentally changed. I mean, if you look at the GFC, top 10 major markets in Australia, demand declined by 0.5 percentage point, which was really nothing in that perspective. It's the fact that we've actually got artificial barriers that are stopping that demand getting to our hotels. And so the interesting thing looking forward in terms of recovery is once those barriers come up, then what does that mean to your hotels and how quickly that demand's going to come through? I mean, obviously domestically focused hotels will recover a lot faster, and we've already seen that from a regional perspective.
80% of our business.
Yep, exactly. I mean, places like Sydney, different story in the CBD. But then the next question is, what other barriers are going to be in terms of capacity? And looking forward, if you look at flight capacity, it took, I think, 3 years after the GFC for flight capacity to recover back to pre-GFC levels. And given a bigger shock now with what's happened with Virgin and the rationalisation of that, I think it's going to be more important and more critical from an ownership perspective and an operator perspective to actually not overlay what's happening in the CBDs to every hotel and the negativity, but actually specifically look at those flight capacities, what it's going to mean longer term, because that's really going to dictate the recovering demand in some of these markets that rely on that flight capacity.
Sort of reminded me of the airline pilot strike when you said that. It's more like that in a way, isn't it? How just travel stopped because of that artificial kind of...
And that's the thing, I mean, you've got to go back to long-term trends, and travel has had exponential growth. I mean, in the last decade, we have not had it as good in the hotel industry. I mean, above average domestic demand, above average international demand. And that happened really, or started post-GFC, which was really driven, in my view, by social media and the advent of social media. Suddenly we had a shift away from buying goods to buying experiences. And I don't see that changing. So that demand, inherent demand's there. It's just how quickly will capacity allow it to come back.
Would you agree with that, Roger?
Yeah, very much. I think there's a lot of talk about the new normal and what changes will really amount to. I don't think very much at all, to be honest. I don't know if people saw the presentation where KP Ho, who's been around longer than any of us, made the point that in the end nothing really will change very much. I think things that have come out of this have been seeing the real importance at the property level of active general managers, high quality general managers willing to be creative and make quick decisions. And in my view, the GMs have been the heroes of this current thing. But to Glenn's point,
100%.
I think it will all come back to where it was. The aspiration for travel will remain high. And don't forget, we used to think it was good when we did 62% year round and we could make money then. And when it was 72%, it was roses. And when it was 82%, we became a high performing asset class. So while it's very clear from those trends that Matthew showed yesterday in the STR report that 4 or 5 months after lockdowns cease, markets are recovering to 55% of prior. So it seems reasonable to think that a year after lockdown's finished, things will be pretty much back to normal. So I don't think there will be much new stuff. I think that point about flexibility, the getting rid of the demarcation in jobs is really, really important. You know, I've got a human resource manager in one of my hotels who's working on the front desk, serving breakfast and parking cars. And that's certainly how it was when I started my career. And I think that's actually a good thing. And the staff doing that work are saying they love it. So I think that might be a positive thing, more engaged, more flexible service, and that will serve customers even better.
I do have, sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry. There is a few silver lining points which are currently occurring. So Australia was traditionally a net exporter. So we have been traveling more overseas. I think last year we had close to over 11,000 overseas trips versus 9.4 million inbound trip coming in. And there is as we are all experiencing, especially the people with the regional properties, there is this need to travel. So hopefully we can capture some of that net surplus and transfer it into local tourism. Also, it was interesting to observe Airbnb. We would traditionally just talk about these conferences about Airbnb, but there have been significant drops in listing, and a big chunk of their portfolio went to kind of a long-term letting pool.
That's the first time that's come up at this conference, those words, Airbnb.
I'm so sorry to raise it. But it was interesting to observe because that's the additional supply, which is the shadow supply we don't like to talk about. At the end of the day, we still compete with that. So that supply has dropped significantly. And the flexibilities which are currently being created, which everyone around this panel is talking about in terms of the labour and the entire restructure, as previously, our break-even points were somewhere in the 40% occupancy that's progressively dropped over the last 6 months, and there are hotels being on a break-even position at 20%. So if that can be all retained moving forward past the pandemic is passing, there is just an upside waiting to happen.
Yeah. One good thing about the operators we all deal with is that they can all claim COVID safe. Airbnb can't do that.
No.
So let's spread that message. I should have mentioned in the beginning, on the stage here, we are actually all representing 53 hotels, 19 operators or brands, about 12,000 rooms. I'm putting about $1 million a room on it, so it's about 12 billion. I've probably underscored that.
Can you buy my portfolio? I'll sell it to you for $1 million a room.
Right. Okay. Well, some of us have probably 2 million a room, so I'm averaging. But I like what Roger said there about general managers. I've really felt with the people I deal with, they've going through quite a bit of pain dealing with shorter work weeks, their pay's being cut, as with a lot of other people. They're definitely going to come out of this stronger. And so I think our assets are going to be in good hands. But what about the future? Somebody has talked about it here. Do you think the business is going to come back? I mean, okay, borders, we're all sort of relying on them to lift, but what's going to be different in the next 2 to 3 years, do you think? Anybody want to start? I mean, from a customer level, from a delivery level, a distribution level, you can choose whatever avenue you'd like.
Look, I think before we get to the future, I mean, our focus on our portfolio has been about setting ourselves up and setting the platform to springboard once recovery comes. And one of the biggest challenges we're seeing in the market at the moment is that given the demand can't come there, I think there's a fear factor where it's very easy to drop your rate by quite a substantial amount of money. And the danger of that is we're not magicians, right? We can't magically wave our wand and create demand. The demand's not coming, not because it doesn't want to come, it's because it's been stopped from actually coming.
Yeah.
And so our focus has been on rate integrity, because we all know that it can take a very long time to recover from rate growth.
So true.
And we can create this self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. Whenever we're in disaster, we think it's the worst ever, everything's going to change, nothing's going to come back. When it's good times, we always factor in it's going on forever, right? And I think we all got to remember that this too will end. It's all a phase. And we need to make sure that we don't make short-term decisions now that actually risk the long-term longevity. So my biggest fear for the future is negativity on the outlook in terms of demand from operators, which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Race to the bottom.
A race to the bottom. And so we've put in measures to stop that happening.
Yeah.
But moving forward, I think it's understanding where your demand's coming from. It's not sitting there and looking at things in a holistic way and going, well, the market's crap. It's actually looking at the individual asset and going, okay, well, how much of my demand is prevented from coming from Victoria? So as soon as the Victorian border comes, how much of my occupancy is likely to come back? How much of my occupancy is coming from the Queensland border? How much is coming from the fact that people don't have the confidence because of border closures to travel? And by understanding really where your demand is, you can sit there and go, okay, well, this is what I expect to do. and I'm happy with that. I can't manufacture demand by dropping my rate because the demand's coming. If it's coming, it's not. If it's not, dropping your rate, you're just giving it away for $40 cheaper.
I seem to remember a conference last year where somebody held up a sign.
I thought about doing the same thing and then putting ACCC on the back.
Howard, I think...
Let's not talk about it. Have you done anything different, Deborah? You've got quite a few hotels, like in terms of internal structures, innovation, product development, anything different?
So we have a range of hotels that are, we don't have regional properties, we have suburban hotels and CBD properties.
Right.
So they have been quite different, the business that we've received at those hotels. Interestingly, the suburban hotels have their mix of business has completely changed. They're very much driven by local demand. So it might be people who are renovating their houses and coming to stay at the hotel while that's happening. It's the logistics sector, supply chain business, infrastructure development. So those hotels have really had to look very, very closely at the local market and what can they capture more than the other hotel next to them.
I tell you what, the tradies will be looking for a holiday next year because they're pretty busy.
Very hard.
They're pretty busy. What about you, Roger? Have you done anything different?
I think there's two opportunities that come out of this. One is guest love. We've got this opportunity at the moment where we're clearly in regional areas getting guests who might otherwise be travelling overseas. I think proving to them that we can deliver a great experience in Australia and getting them coming back because of it. And we've got the time. When you've got one person on and 10% occupancy, you've got the time to give the guests lots of love. So I think making sure there's a focus on getting guests back is important. I think the other opportunity kind of aligns with what you said about Airbnb, Howard, and that's the food and beverage area. Again, the big brand hotels, we've got the real estate, we've got the trust of guests. I think there's a real opportunity to reclaim the ground in food and beverage.
Absolutely.
And provide great food and beverage products. I've got one hotel that's virtually breaking even with 11% occupancy, but doing really, really well in its food and beverage business. So I think that opportunity's there.
What about technology? Are any of you willing to put some more into that right now? Because this might help us, again, looking to the future. You've got lean and mean management structures, I assume, in all the hotels. So, but maybe this is the time that owners need to step up, given their cash flows are pretty lean as well, and think about some more technology to keep the cost base low. Operationally?
Look, technology is one thing, and I'll touch base on it in 1 second, but what we are actually doing, to speak to your previous question, we are reinvesting capital into our hotels, and that's what we have been doing for the last 6 months, but that's what we are actually continue to do. So we are going to start renovation on Intercontinental Sydney. Over this process, we're going to spend $90 million plus on Intercontinental Sydney, which is starting this week.
While it still trades?
Currently, so we have to close Intercontinental Sydney and it's become an isolation hotel.
Oh.
So it will go from isolation hotel to
closed
refurbishment hotel.
Right. So it's virtually closed, you might say, for the general public.
Yet to be decided. Hayman Island over the last 4 months, following the reopening on the 1st of July is Intercontinental Hayman Island, where we refurbished the asset over the last 2 years and spent significant money on everything, including technology. Has just done a second level of reopening, and that's just opened on the 1st of September. So we, again, reinvested lots of capital in the island. It's spectacular, it's amazing, and it's shining, and just waiting for the borders to reopen.
But can you order room service on a phone, for example?
Yes, you can now.
At Hayman?
Yeah, there was a significant investment into technology, so everything is very centralized, and it goes via iPad. We have reduced staffing levels structurally by probably about 20% from what the structure was previously because of technology and the restructures in a general sense.
Yeah.
All my owners are investing at the moment, Howard, to some degree or another. It's a good opportunity with downtime to do work that's guest disruptive, and certainly investment in technology is high. I think this is one area where individual chains will gain some competitive advantage. There's quite some gaps between the chains on things like keyless entry and remote check-in and remote check-out, and I think that's definitely a competitive advantage. So hopefully, along with owners investing, the chains will invest quickly to provide those products. And they've got other benefits apart from the current environment of satisfying people's health and safety needs. The long-term benefit of not having the labour cost of servicing people at the front desk for check-in, for example, and keys will provide us a benefit.
One thing before we go, I did want to ask the group, you brought up operators. What are they working with you? Can the model be different? Is this the time to change how we work with them? They've been asset light for many, many years. Isn't it time for them to be a little more asset rich and perhaps invest as well as manage?
I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, Howard. We might wish it to be, but I don't think that's the reality. Look, I mean, to be fair to the operators, and it's the same with politicians, I mean, yes, it's an unprecedented time, people make mistakes, but overall, it's been a fantastic working relationship. Like Simon McGrath said yesterday, it hasn't been confrontational at all. Everyone's been there working together to come with outcomes. I think the interesting thing will be how do we continue to keep those initiatives and savings in for the long term and make sure they don't come in. So those dialogues and those open dialogues will continue. I think the flexibility around budgeting for next year is coming in from both an operator and owner push as well in terms of what that's doing. But the flexibility that we've seen from the operators in terms of how they've dealt with this has been really good to see. So I don't have anything negative to say in that respect.
Would you agree, Deb?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with Glenn. So talking about budgeting, so we operate on a financial year, and so we have moved with our management company, and they have been very good to work with through the...
Would you care to tell the audience what your occupancy is for the next 12 months?
Well,
in general?
No, I cannot, because we are not setting a budget. So to Glenn's point, we have moved to basically
like a quarterly forecast sort of
forecasting
thing. Okay.
Model, because right now no one can predict where this is going. So so we've I think it's fair to say we've worked very collaboratively with the operator, and we've been very impressed at how they have moved swiftly and communicated, and how we've worked together.
Malfa, the same?
Same message is going to resonate, I think, across all of us. The communication has been exceptional. We have wonderful senior executive teams in our hotels. We have wonderful general managers, and we work very closely with the entire executive team on revenue forecast, P&L expenses, the refurbishment projects. So, and the head office team was also highly supportive over the past 6 months.
I agree. I think very collaborative, very responsive. Key things that the operators can provide that we can't, that have made the differences, is talent. Great general managers have made the difference. Distribution, and also leveraging buying power, the ability to do deals on behalf of the hotels collectively to reduce costs at the moment has been exceptional. So within the things they control, they've done exceptionally well, but the relationship's been very collaborative.
I don't think I've heard so much positive about the operators in my 20 years of asset management. All right, listen, thanks very much. Glenn, Deb, Lucia, Roger, thanks last minute. Please thank my guests. Thank you. James Wilkinson is coming back on stage. He'll be talking to Jeff Wagner, who's the CEO, Group Vice President of Outrigger. And there's Jeff. Won't be a second, Jeff. We'll be right with you.
Okay. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for your time, mate. What are we looking at today? Have you got... You got Fiji in the background? That's Kapalua.
Kapalua in the background there today.
I think
you know, James, with Zoom and WebEx and all the other technology that's out there today, unfortunately, this one is actually a picture and not one of the Zoom backgrounds. So it sits behind me here in my office.
Thanks for wearing your Hawaiian shirt too. Those that know me know I usually interview Jeff on the balcony at the Outrigger in Waikiki with Waikiki Beach in the background and music from Duke's coming from downstairs. So.
Exactly. The only thing I don't have on today is my lei. I wish I had one with me.
I tell you, mate, Waikiki Beach must be cleaner than ever now that there's literally just no tourists on that beach.
James, it's unbelievable. You know, when I look outside my window right here in my office here in Waikiki, it is beautiful, 80 degrees, incredibly sunny, just the most amazing place on the planet, and there's not a soul walking the street. It's really an eerie feeling. It is incredibly clean, and I think we're ready to welcome back tourists. It's not going to happen yet, but definitely it's a very different feeling here in Waikiki.
We were having a good chat with Heidi from Hilton before and talking about the French Polynesia example of doing the COVID testing 72 hours before travel. Obviously, hopefully that can become some kind of benchmark for the South Pacific, where obviously you have a lot of properties in not just Hawaii, obviously, but Fiji, very importantly as well.
Absolutely. You know, when you think about Hawaii, you know, we're in Fiji and we're in Thailand as well, Maldives, Mauritius, so we're all over. And it's really good for us to be able to see some of the other protocols that are being kind of either trialed or put into place so that we can create some of that here in Hawaii as well. But the 72-hour test is a big part of it. You're seeing the rapid tests are coming around right now a little bit more. Currently, we're looking at opening up Hawaii again on October the 1st, but we have many of our other properties are still open. So both Fiji properties are opening now. And, you know, it's a safe place. You know, there's not a lot of cases that have bubbled up in Fiji over time. And we've been able to open those two properties successfully.
And when you look at that, obviously, speaking of Hawaii, I mean, it was the one US state that was completely quarantined from the outright, but Hawaii also always has been careful with quarantine from an agriculture standpoint. So the state's kind of used to having strict rules in place, but it actually has literally been its own island off the United States, separated from the United States. How's that kind of been for you, where you know, the freedom of travel, like we do have in Australia, it's a similar situation in Hawaii for you?
Yeah, it has its pluses and minuses. You know, clearly we can regulate who comes in and we can make sure people have tests when they come in. You can't drive here. At the same time, what we've all learned is that there's pent up demand for drive vacations. And so you're seeing places on the mainland US that are drive to that are full. You know, hotels, resorts are full because there's a lot of travel that's pent up. And we don't have that here. We can't have that here in Hawaii because they've got to be able to have air travel coming in. So it's been a little bit of a tough time for us. We do have a 14-day quarantine still in place. So if you did travel here, you would have to quarantine for 14 days. We're hoping to be able to break out of that soon.
And obviously, when you look at that, I mean, all of your hotels are in key oceanfront leisure destinations. So we talk about pent-up demand for travel. What kind of interest are you seeing from customers wanting to book vacations in the future at your properties, be it in Thailand, be it in Fiji, be it in Hawaii or elsewhere?
You know, different in different markets, but generally, I'll give you kind of the U.S. market for an example. So 65% of the hotels here in the U.S. say they're going to run below 50% occupancy. So in the greater U.S., there's still a pretty low occupancy here in the market, even though most of those markets are open. What we're finding is that, you know, Americans are saying that 33% of them have traveled overnight. So still a really low rate of people have traveled overnight. But 38% say they may travel by the end of the year. So there's still some pent up demand out there. As you probably know, in Thailand, they're talking about some opening as well. And that's coming with a bunch of protocols that'll also be very test heavy. And then in Fiji, we've done some really neat programs in Fiji because the borders aren't necessarily open yet, with kind of locals travel. And so both properties have been really successful because it's very, very contained with being able to bring in travel that's just from the locals. So it's a whole mixed bag, but we're keeping a close eye on all the different markets to be able to get travel back as soon as we can.
And if you look at the Bulla bubble, which they're talking about with Australia, obviously, where you go and you do your 2 weeks of quarantine at the resort. Not about a 2-week holiday there, Jeff. Are you kind of, obviously, Fiji is obviously a very tricky position where it's not like states here like Australia, New South Wales or Queensland, where we do have domestic tourism. Fiji has obviously a very minimal domestic tourism, but obviously how much damage, so to speak, do you think has been done in places like Fiji and Hawaii, and how fast do you need the border situation to improve?
Yeah, it needs to open quickly. I think there's enough protocol and testing out there today that we can put in place to be able to get things open. One of the things that happens with a lot of the cases that are out there is they happen in congregation primarily. And so you think about when someone travels and they've had a test before they come in, and then it's a family of 2 or 3 or 4 people. They're not going to congregate in groups of 50 or 60 when you're going to a resort leisure destination. So we're pretty bullish that we can open in most of our locations here pretty quickly. Now, related to the Bulla bubble, I think I'm wanting to propose the Aloha Bulla bubble. So I'd like to throw Hawaii in the mix, I think it would be tests are low here, or not a lot of people have COVID, and we'd love to be in the mix with that bubble for sure.
I think with the work from home situation, a lot of Aussies would be happy with a Aloha bubble situation of having a 3-hour time difference and being able to dial in. So, mate, speaking of Australia, what are your ambitions still from a development standpoint? You're not shy of saying that you want more properties back in Australia again, where the brand was very, very strong before it was acquired by Mantra. The properties were acquired by Mantra twice on 2 different occasions. So how much hunger do you have for Australia still?
It's big, and the sooner the better. We have looked at a few different properties already. Unfortunately, we weren't able to make those happen. As you know, James, and you said it, we had 14 hotels or resorts in Australia at one time. We are currently looking at a property, don't have it under letter of intent yet, but this is probably the 4th run we've made at a property in Australia, and it's going to stick. It's just a matter of time, but we're looking at some really good assets that we think will make fabulous outriggers.
Obviously, are your goals still the same now with the Outrigger master brand in terms of absolute beachfront, almost not even a road in front of the hotel onto a beach? Is that your goal still for Australia?
It is, and we really want to have the kind of toes in the sand as our brand mantra for any of the locations that we're going to be in. There are some unique circumstances, like when you think about the Gold Coast, not a lot of the properties are right on the beach. There might be a road in between. And so we would probably make an exception for the right location, which the Gold Coast would absolutely be for us. But, toes in the sand, being right on the beach is really where we want our brand to resonate.
And you obviously, you reach the brand very west in terms of an Asian standpoint throughout the islands with the Maldives and everything else. Are you focusing right back on the other west, being the US West Coast, versus from an expansion standpoint, or do you still want to do more in Asia as well?
We do. We've got we do both. We want to continue to grow in Asia. We want to grow on the U.S. West Coast, as well as here in Hawaii. So we've got 2 properties under a letter of intent right now in Thailand. We've got 2 properties from a management standpoint under a letter of intent here in Hawaii. And so we continue to want to grow globally and in a pretty balanced way. On the U.S. mainland, when you think about California, I think it's just such a natural for us, and we've made a run at a couple properties, and we'll continue to do so. I think the one area that today we would do opportunistically, but not aggressively go after, would be out in the Caribbean or in the East Coast of the U.S. If there was something there that was, on the beach in a fabulous location like Miami or one of the islands out in the Caribbean, we'd take a look at it for sure. But we're primarily focused on Asia, Hawaii, and the west coast of California.
And obviously, when you look at that, you've got such a strong brand following from an Australian standpoint, obviously, as well as a US standpoint. So anywhere you do go, you do have a fantastic brand recognition to be able to take with you when you do grow into the bigger markets like California and Mexico, et cetera, don't you?
Absolutely, and with the dollar finally making a change, Australian dollar versus the U.S., that's going to be helpful, I think, as well. So we're excited about how that looks going forward here into Hawaii as well as into the mainland U.S. once we have a property there. But we're encouraged. The Australian traveler, when you look at our Hawaii properties with the Outrigger Waikiki, with Dukes, and what has happened there over the years, we feel number one, we feel terrible Hawaii's not open. We love the Australian traveler coming into our markets here. I know all the hotels do, and it's just a shame that with the dollar changing like it is, that we can't get travel stimulated back to the market here yet.
Yeah, obviously, it's obviously then very positive when you hear people like Andrew Burns yesterday from Hello World talking about that demand, obviously, of people wanting to get away or where they can get away. Now, something interesting I wanted to ask you was, if you look at, you've had a lot of leadership positions in hotel groups across the US, and so during the situation that you're in now within the pandemic, Hawaii is a challenge, as your old role would have been quite a challenge as well. Which position do you think would have been the easier position from a leadership standpoint, do you think? New York or Honolulu? What do you think?
Well, you put me in a tough spot right there. But no, I love working here in Hawaii. This is a very difficult situation to be shut down completely on the island. I say shut down. We have the 14-day quarantine, which generally, taps down travel pretty significantly. But this has been an incredible challenge. And you think about the circumstances with employees, and which is very, very difficult to furlough employees like everybody's had to do here on the islands. When you look at trying to create some type of travel via military or other opportunities that are going to be able to deal with the 14-day quarantine. And you look at kind of burn rate of your company and how things are going forward. It's a unique leadership or management process that we're all having to live through that none of us have in the past. And so to me, our team is amazing. Everybody's stepped up. They're all working incredibly hard. Many people are wearing 2 or 3 or 4 hats in their jobs today. And, everybody's got their arms locked and said, let's figure this out and let's figure out how to get to that next place where we've got tourism coming back to Hawaii. So I love what we're going through. I hate that we're going through it, but I really, it's brought our team together in a real connected way to figure out how does the future look here.
And obviously, those that don't know, Hawaii is unfortunately facing a very high unemployment rate, a lot of it based around, obviously, travel and tourism and hospitality. How fast do you think that would change? Once a border does open for you, is that something that a lot of people will be back in roles fairly quickly, do you think?
Well, I think that it's going to take some time to ramp back up. And when you look at STAR, they put a forecast out for next year for Hawaii. It starts in the 20 to 30% range for Q1, and then it ramps up from there into Q4, where it's maybe in the mid-60s. This is a market that ran 85% occupancy year round. And even in seasonality periods, you could run 85% occupancy utilizing rate as a lever. And so I think it's going to take some time to be able to get everybody back to work, but we're going to work hard to make that happen. We're all hoping and not just relying on hope, but we're going to market our way into trying to drive travel back into Hawaii as quickly as we can. So again, you don't want to rely on pent-up demand. You think it's there. But the recovery plans that Hawaii in general, as well as our companies putting into place, I think will have a significant impact on getting people back to work pretty quickly.
Great. Well, Jeff, as you know, I love both Fiji and Hawaii, so I watch it very, very closely in terms of how that all transpires, and really hope that things do get better for you. 85% year-round occupancy on a normal year is absolutely incredible numbers. So hopefully it can start getting back quickly. Fortunately, you are in a position that you do. Just before we go, you have had some recent signings. I just want to talk about those very briefly. Obviously, how important is it then, back to the roots again of the company and growing in your homeland? How important is that from a brand standpoint?
Yeah, it's important, but it's important for us to grow across the globe. For us, we want to be an international or global hotel company. And so getting back into these destinations like Australia, for example, is critically important to us. James, I talk about all the time that I came here and somebody said, "Hey, Jeff, we're looking at a property in Palau." And I was like, okay, where in the world do I go look now? And I go to Google Maps and I start zooming in, and all these little islands start popping out at you. The world is huge. The globe is huge. And there's a lot of opportunities out there. And, there's great resort destinations that we think we can still be in. And we're going to look globally for those opportunities.
Yeah, well, Jeff, I love your confidence as always. You're always great to talk to. And for those who don't know, Jeff actually had committed to coming to AHICE. It was going to be his first time coming to Melbourne. So grateful you were able to dial in, and mate, wonderful with the Hawaiian shirt. You have to make sure that's a staple now every time we have a chat.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, James. And my apologies for not being able to be there in person, and look forward to seeing you here in Hawaii soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Aloha. Please welcome Michael Johnson, the CEO of the TAA. Please welcome Michael.
Thank you, Howard. And a very good morning to everyone and everyone that are looking on virtually. Look, I'd like to just start by thanking James and the team at Intermedia for giving us the opportunity to speak today. I'd also like to publicly thank Jane Lyons and her team here at the Hyatt Regency. They're doing a fantastic job working under this COVID-safe plan, which is so critical. I also feel for the team, and I'm sure some of you are experiencing the same as me this morning when you enter the hotel and see very few guests in view. It's a very tough time, as we know. And I don't think I need to explain it to this room just how bad things are for our accommodation sector, and particularly for those in Victoria, where that crisis is continuing. We started the year, of course, with droughts and bushfires, and I recall we actually went down to Bateman's Bay to support the regions following the bushfires, but of course it was very short-lived before COVID, and we went downhill from there. It was interesting at our TAA Chairman's Drinks this year, Martin Ferguson was very quick to say after the travel restrictions with China were implemented that we are entering uncharted waters, and how right he was. For months we've heard bad news and dire predictions of our struggling industry, but I think it's important to spell out where we do stand. I've ticked over 40 years in the industry this year. It doesn't seem, it's gone very quickly, I'd have to say. I live it, I breathe it, and I think it's been mentioned, and we've heard, we have lived through the pilots dispute, Asian crisis, September 11, SARS, MERS, the GFC. I've said on a number of occasions, I think you put COVID together and say, you put all that together, that's what we're dealing. You take all of those incidents and COVID tops them all. We now find that the majority of our hotels and CBDs around the country are operating 50 to 60% down. We heard that from STR. Obviously, Sydney and Melbourne are the hardest hit, and with RevPARs down 75% and higher. So it would be even worse, I think, if we didn't have some of the hotels playing that important role of quarantine. And again, I'd like to publicly thank those hotels. They've done a fantastic job. And whilst there has been some shortcomings in quarantine, there certainly hasn't been shortcomings in our effort from our hotels in looking after those returning travellers where we knew that the pandemic was stemming from. I'd have to say there is some green shoots, and that's been mentioned as well, particularly in our regions. And in New South Wales, for example, we've seen some real positive signs in places like the Hunter Valley, Byron Bay, Orange, Blue Mountains, South Coast. And I'd like to just pick up on what was being said by one of our New South Wales board members, Glenn Boltwood, earlier. And it's great to see that average rates in these regions are actually holding up. And they're actually exceeding their average rates of last year. So it's good to see that the industry is saying, well, there is pent-up demand and we can charge for it. There's also some interesting things happening across some of our states and territories, particularly with the government-backed voucher programs that we've seen introduced in Tasmania and prior in the Northern Territory. And so these are actually creating that intrastate tourism. But these, again, are small shoots. There's no doubt that our industry is in survival mode, mostly staying afloat through these quarantine contracts and JobKeeper subsidies. And there's still no clear end in sight. With no real sight of international borders reopening soon, state border restrictions becoming increasingly political, and our New Zealand bubble, which really is no longer an option this year, would suggest 2020 is effectively now, particularly for a lot of our CBDs, a write-off, and the first half of 2021 is certainly not looking much brighter. In fact, the forecasters are saying that we'll be up to about 4 years or mid-2024 before our industry returns to anything like pre-COVID-19 occupancies, revenues and profitability. Our tourism, aviation and hospitality will be changed forever by this pandemic, but we have to readjust our expectations of what a good result actually is. If we continue to judge our success by the 85% and 90% annual occupancy rates that we've enjoyed in the past, particularly in those traditional markets of Sydney and Melbourne, then we're going to be miserable for a long time. We need to be agile. It's been discussed before. We are resilient, but we need to look clear-eyed at what post-COVID success will look like and adjust our operating structures and our businesses to what the new normal has in front of us. And when governments are under extreme pressure, when politicians are grappling with an unprecedented health crisis, every industry is suffering and everybody has their hand out for support. In times of crisis, it's impossible to get the ear of those in power unless you have long-established and mutually respectful relationships with those that are making the decisions. And in short, you need a seat at the table. And I'm pleased to say that we do. Over many years, the TAA and the AHA have built a national and a state network that is second to none. We have long fostered strong connections to governments at all levels, and our President at federal, and even more importantly during this pandemic, at the state level, has made a real difference. And I have to say our CEOs in all the states and territories have really just worked tirelessly with their respective ministers, premiers, to actually make a difference to some of these restrictions. But the road back from COVID is not going to be simple, and decisions about restrictions are largely rest with the individual states, as we know, and they're becoming more complicated. We're all on the same road to recovery, but it seems that some are moving a lot faster than others. Each state has its own unique set of circumstances, and the difference between them seem to be widening. There's no way we could compare today the state of the accommodation hotels in Victoria with somewhere like Western Australia, which is now virtually virus and restriction-free. TAA and the AHA state CEOs have been working on localised responses with their various state and territory governments, and their efforts have been actually quite critical. I've said it many times in the last few months that if we don't have somewhere to actually have a meal or a drink, then who will travel? On top of the state collaboration, of course, we also have our national voice. We're knocking on the doors and we're talking to the people who matter. One example, TAA worked directly with Federal Treasury and on the extension of JobKeeper. We provided the modelling by Ernst & Young, which was instrumental in convincing government to adjust the program in versions 2 and 3. And many would know our TAA National Chairman, Martin Ferguson, is actively involved in the Tourism Restart Task Force, which reports directly into the NCC, which goes back to the National Cabinet, giving our industry a strong voice where it matters. And Martin and I also just recently appeared on the Federal Senate Select Committee on COVID-19, representing the accommodation industry. And we told the committee in no uncertain terms that our interstate and international borders, whilst that travel is restricted, we're going to continue to need help from governments. And then, of course, we have our national AHA CEO, Stephen Ferguson, who's been working with the Fair Work Committee and the United Workers Union to adjust the Hospitality Award. This has been helpful as it's cushioned the COVID-19 blow and it's achieved great results on behalf of our industry. And interestingly, our Federal Industrial Relations Minister, Christian Porter, recently told Parliament that the second iteration of JobKeeper was modelled on the groundbreaking agreement struck between the AHA and the unions. Now, there's one last matter that needs to be discussed, and by now, most of you will have heard that talks are underway to create one united voice for the accommodation industry nationwide. One strong united voice to push our issues during this vital time. Now, Dean and I have spoken about this many times. I know it's something that Jerry has publicly been requesting, and certainly our boards and our national boards and state boards are unanimous in that it's something that we want to see happen. We advocate for it. The AHA, TAA and AA are currently in those discussions. There is a working party. It's been put together to work on a new model, and that will represent one clear national voice. They've been meeting behind the scenes and they're making progress. And we are confident of finally bringing this industry together. And as these talks continue, I have to remind everyone that both industries will continue to be advocating on behalf of their members, and we will be getting cut through. But whilst circumstances remain dire, particularly in Victoria, where there is a real need for clear guidance from that state government to prevent our sector sustaining even more prolonged financial damage. Health comes first, but the Victorian government needs to consider the harsh economic realities in a decision-making process as large-scale employee redundancies become increasingly prevalent across the hotel industry. So as we look towards 2021, history tells us that this pandemic will run its course, and when we emerge from this crisis, we will be stronger, more resilient, and more profitable industry. Thank you very much this morning.
Thanks, Michael. Now we welcome back James Wilkinson, who'll be talking to David Mansfield, who's the COO of Quest Apartment Hotels. There he is. Hello, David.
Might be better that we start.
Hi, James.
Hey, David. Thank you for joining us. We just obviously heard some great points just now from Michael Johnson, including a new association, David, in terms of coming together. It's obviously something that all of us have been watching for some time. So what's your take on that? We've been asking a few people here or there about it, but what's your take on having a unified voice in the industry for Australia?
Oh, I welcome it, James. I think it's long overdue, and I think in order to be effective with government, and particularly lobbying government agendas, they would be aided by having one voice representing the industry as a whole.
No, agreed. And I think it's good on everyone coming together and trying to do that. So you're in Melbourne, obviously a tricky situation down there at the moment, but obviously hopefully a path out sometime soon. Mate, what kind of challenges? I mean, we were talking with you on our virtual summit just back in June. So, mate, how's it all going for you now, and just generally with Quest across the country?
Yeah, thanks, James. Well, listen, over the last 30 years, Quest has developed a fairly robust franchise model that provides a template for aspiring business owners. With close adherence to a model coupled with the old-fashioned ethic of working hard, we've placed people in positions where they've been able to grow their wealth and build their financial security for themselves and, most importantly, for their families. But make no mistake, today our franchisees and their families are extremely anxious as to what the future holds. We have landlords who require further banking and government support as they work with our franchisees, the business owners, so to ensure their asset has a viable tenant into whatever recovery looks like for us. As you mentioned, in Victoria, the situation is much harsher. With the state's metro and regional roadmaps unlikely preventing business usual travel for us until the 26th of October now, we can only hope that a swift reduction in the case numbers will expedite the roadmap, which obviously every day we glimmer to the numbers, which is sad in itself, but and especially when you combine it with the deaths on a daily basis, it's very sombering. But because of this timeline, it's called franchise. It could cause franchise or our Victorian businesses, including franchisees, significant harm, and most importantly, risk of business closure.
Yeah.
And especially now, I mean, we are providing extensive support to our franchisees in the network in Victoria and throughout the country. But James, it's incredibly taxing, both financially and emotionally for these individuals who are stewarding these businesses at this time. I guess the only glimmer for us, throughout the pandemic, our regional and suburban properties have been most resilient, which has been encouraging. And we believe that will lead to recovery for our company overall. But while the challenge ahead isn't lost on us, we are glad that we've seen some incremental uptick nationally within all states, with the exception of Victoria. But we're obviously eager to see the revival of Australia's visitor economy as soon as possible.
Yeah, in the regions, we talked about the regions, David, and obviously, your properties, some of the regional properties have actually been quite busy, given they've got either longer-term guests or they are in cities that are really booming. I mean, Orange is a good example. We've heard Michael talk about Orange again before. I was there a few weeks ago, and the weekends in Orange, they complain about there's too many Sydney-siders now. They can't actually go to dinner in restaurants at the moment because Sydney-siders are literally going up there in droves, where the weekends are turning from Thursdays all the way through to Tuesdays now, which is really good. So from a regional standpoint, how are your properties going, David? Are you kind of seeing that bit of a trend in areas where people just do want to be able to get away?
Overall, we've been very pleased with the regional performance. It's still been trying in certain patches, but occupancies of around 70 to 80% are not unheard of in our network at this time and during the pandemic. But I think the key there is, those properties are located in areas which they are the local area. They support the local communities that they're in. And our franchisees engage with the local area very vigorously to be part of the community. So they are supported, you find, particularly, say, for example, as you mentioned, Quest Orange, that franchisee and that family unit are basically part of the community, and the community support them. And with the activity that's happening in the region, they are generally the place to stay. We just opened Quest Robina on the Gold Coast during the height of the pandemic. And they're now starting to see interstate corporate and leisure bookings come through over the last 6 weeks, which has been encouraging. But they're a long way away from being financially viable.
Yeah, I guess fortunately they have had AFL games on almost every single day just down the street from the stadium. So very strategically placed, David, of that hotel. And speaking of sport, you had a good win yesterday. Those, I'm not sure if everyone saw, but our HM newsletter yesterday, we did announce that Quest are branding the property and managing the property at Shark Park in Woolooware. So that's an exciting signing for you that's been a bit hush-hush for some time. A few have known about it, but congratulations on that signing. How important is it then to grow in those areas now, especially on the back of sports tourism, which traditionally has been getting stronger and stronger?
Very much, James. Notwithstanding the restricted lending environment we faced throughout the pandemic, we continue to sell brownfield and greenfield franchise businesses. And as with the announcement yesterday, our pipeline for the remainder of the year remains intact, which is good news. And there's the announcement yesterday with the Quest Woolooware Bay Town Centre. This is a development that delivers significant infrastructure and community offering at the doorstep of the Cronulla Sharks headquarters. So this has been a long wait, as you mentioned, but very pleased for the developer to be able to announce that, and they can actually activate that site as they are now currently doing. And on that growth piece, I guess, James, we work closely with our development partners. And, despite the headwinds, we've been able to maintain a steady program of openings. And by the end of the year, we will open 6 properties in core markets in Australia and New Zealand. And obviously our aim as Quest is to provide our development partners sustained rental yields under secured long-term leases, which is the key to our success. And we are, experiencing interest from other parties and developers as we go through this pandemic, which is encouraging at the same time.
Now, you look at that New Zealand growth, and you have been significantly growing in New Zealand in the last 3 or 4 years, David. So tell us a bit about that, and how's that market gone over there?
It's a very resilient little country. So I think, all due respect to fellow New Zealanders, they've done a great job in maintaining growth and stability. And obviously they've had to weather similar circumstances that we have here in Australia. However, I guess the commitment and the resolve to doing business in New Zealand remains strong. Obviously they've had a blip in recent weeks, but nonetheless the sentiment and the mood is very supportive towards domestic economic activity, and obviously waiting for that bubble that we all know has eluded us, and will obviously kick in eventually. We're confident that will happen.
And on a growth standpoint, David, we talk about Australian growth, obviously New Zealand growth, but you obviously opened a UK property fairly recently. And how are the global ambitions going in terms of taking the Quest product into the UK, which there's a huge demand for long stay product in the UK, especially around the service apartment market, which is getting a lot more traction of late. So obviously great opportunities there still for you.
Yes, we do anticipate some further growth there. And as you mentioned, we opened our first property in September last year. So we are working with our parent company, the Ascot Limited, to leverage capabilities and support and resources to continue to grow. Obviously, we've been stalled a little bit during the pandemic. But nonetheless, we are optimistic we'll start to get some runs on the board there and grow our brand under a franchising model in that location over the next 2 to 5 years.
And David, just from a leadership standpoint, what's been your biggest takeaway from the pandemic and things that you think the company has done very well?
Yeah, well, James, I guess in the beginning, I guess we were rewriting our business continuity plan every 15 minutes. And like everyone, we've learned a hell of a lot. No one could script this. We didn't get everything right, but I'm confident, I'm very convinced we were able to get most in place. And I think the importance of keeping staff in the franchisee network informed and unified has been more pertinent than ever. This remains a daily focus for us. If a business owner or a franchisee did not have a relationship with their landlord before COVID, they sure as hell have one now. And we've stood by our franchisees across all our locations, supporting them as much as we have to, and even extra, to ensure they're viable, as they entered into very arduous, and you can appreciate, difficult negotiations in good faith with their landlords. And unfortunately, we feel this is unlikely. With the current border restrictions and the impact of Victoria's current lockdown, simply put, businesses will not survive. We're very cognizant we won't be able to survive. Not every business will get through this. But our aim is obviously to achieve that, but it's highly unlikely given the environment we're operating in. And I think the biggest part, James, with our model is, in respect to the lease agreement in place with tenant and a landlord, we remain committed to a balanced stakeholder approach which aims to uphold the interests of both landlords and operators, particularly as they navigate the various mandatory code of conduct requirements. And obviously that's been aimed to discourage one party from profiteering over the other. Collectively, we must work harder than ever before in preserving the business's viability as we secure future returns for all parties. So that's been probably the bulk of the work that we're currently and have been working on. I'm quietly optimistic we'll get most through it.
Indeed. Well, David, thank you so much for your wonderful insight as always, and please stay safe and well in Melbourne.
Thanks, James. All the best, and well done for putting on this event. Appreciate your steadfast approach.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, David. And James, you're staying there and talking with Jura Domazet, the CEO of the Doma Group. Welcome back, Jura.
Thank you, Howard.
All right. Well, mate, thank you so much for joining us here at AHICE.
Oh, thanks for having me, James. It's great to be at an actual live, in-person conference. So, it's great to see. Even though the room's sparse, at least we're here.
No, I think it was kind of good to be able to do something. Shame we couldn't have it at your new little hotel, which is almost finished up the street.
We don't have a room this large. They're very, very small rooms. But yeah, we'll open about mid-October.
They're very exciting. Obviously, those that haven't seen it or don't know, the Little National's opening above Wynyard Station. So not the easiest of construction for a new build hotel. We're just plonking on top of a train station in the middle of Sydney.
The hardest thing was actually putting the crane up, and then the next hardest thing was taking the crane down. But once they had that sorted, it sort of went like clockwork. So they've done a good job. Hutchinson's has done a very good job.
So, we're not going to ask you who your favourite is. Obviously, that's a challenging question. But this is a pretty amazing, impressive hotel from where the brand's come from as well, from what your first concept was of Little National and where you're taking the brand. You're really elevating the brand with this development.
Yeah, well, I think I've said to you before, we've tried for a number of years to expand this. We had a good site in Brisbane. We never anticipated that our second hotel would actually be in Sydney, and Sydney's the hardest one to get into, and particularly the location we're in is probably the prime location. Just listening yesterday to Todd from Crown Resorts, I mean, we see that as the reason that we are in that location. It's the entertainment, or the new entertainment area for Sydney with Barangaroo and Darling Harbour and now Crown Resorts about to open. As well as that, we've got the whole office precinct growing around us and the Brookfield development to the east of us as well on the other side of Wynyard. So a lot of focus and activity in Sydney in that area. Obviously the transport linkages are fantastic. And I think when I look at the greater landscape, okay, the market's not doing so well now, everyone will acknowledge that, but I'm an optimist and we always look at the medium to long term for these properties and that location is always going to be paramount.
And we heard from Brendan from Intrust before talking about the bounce backs that he's expecting. They're obviously a big investor in commercial real estate all over the world as a super fund. And he said he was confident that obviously the offices would come back to life. So obviously that's a real key for you as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, at the moment, in the CBD at the moment, it's a lot busier than it was even just a month ago. And I certainly, anecdotally, talking to people in the private sector versus public sector, there is a reasonable push to get back in the office. Public sector is a little bit more reticent, and particularly in Canberra we notice that. But Sydney there's a little bit of it. I don't see a big work from home movement eventually. I think there might be a Tuesday to Thursday work in the office culture that sort of springs up, as well as some satellite offices. But I think the CBD and that core of people, I mean, similar to conferences, people like congregating, they like exchanging ideas, and that happens better in person than in a teleconference and working remotely. So I do see that this being just a phase that we'll sort of not get through, but we'll manage through, adjust, and we might do things a little bit differently afterwards. But I think in essence, we have had a pandemic before. Okay, it was before any of our times, but life adjusted and went on. And as I said, I am an optimist, so I know a lot of people might disagree with this, but I do think we'll remember this, we'll learn from this, but we'll adjust to it as well.
And obviously, from a brand standpoint, the brand is growing. You've got other projects in the pipeline. Tell us about those.
Well, obviously, our main emphasis is to expand Little National. What's been difficult over the last few years is just, every market has been firing. In property, we deal with residential, commercial and hotels, and all three of them been going off because interest rates have been so low, and Australia's been seen as a very good place to invest. And those markets have all been very strong as well. So, I mean, Sydney, again, is the best example of that, and Melbourne's been very close to it. So what I see now is an opportunity to adjust or adjust people's expectations, and also I think there's going to be a limit on the amount of finance people can get for new hotels. We've seen that already with our bankers saying, okay, when we look at hotels now, we do need to look at them with the new metric in place, as against what they might have looked at a year ago. In saying that, we've got strong support from our financiers, and we're quite diversified, so we're probably less affected than a pure hotel play. So I do see a lot more opportunities to expand Little National, and we've obviously got aspirations for Melbourne, Brisbane, another one in Sydney, Perth and Adelaide as well, and they've all been on the boil, and hopefully some of those will come about. But I don't see, at the moment, valuations are pretty sticky going down, and financiers are being accommodating still for people sitting on land and sort of old buildings. So I actually don't see much activity in the next 6 months. I do see it in sort of the second half of next year without wishing people ill, there'll be a bit more financial pressure next year, and a lot of people have already alluded to sort of phantom businesses that exist. I think there's also phantom investments that exist at the moment that are being sort of nurtured through by financiers. But outside of that, we've got a pub at Jarvis Bay called the Huskisson Hotel, which is sort of an unusual one we've owned for a while, but a very good little business, and we're just taking this opportunity to put a big pavilion outside that'll double its capacity, and we've bought a block of land up the road for a 60-room hotel that we're working on at the moment with plans. And again, a few people have talked about regional Australia, and I think having travelled the world a fair bit, my wife and family and I have you really learned to appreciate how good we've got it here. And I'd just like to think that this opportunity, or people being forced to holiday in Australia, will actually start realising what we've got here, and that we don't miss out too much. I mean, okay, there's things we don't have, but in terms of natural beauty and experiences, a lot we do have. So hopefully some of this regional and coastal travel is a bit more sticky in future. So even as international flights come in, I don't think they'll come in, in a mid-21 in a big burst. They'll sort of feed in, and there might be restrictions on numbers, but hopefully there's a bit of stickiness with that regional tourism. I'd love to see New South Wales not just being Sydney, but New South Wales being from Eden to Byron Bay, and sort of a drive market that picks up a lot of really good quality properties and experiences, and maybe that's what might come out of this.
If you look at sort of where the businesses come from and what you're doing, obviously those who didn't see Design In yesterday morning, you were on a great session about hotels as placemakers and storytellers, and it is what you've done with the group. In Canberra, you created a precinct that wasn't there, and it's a residential and hotel precinct. Have you got aspirations to do more precincts like that on the back of that success? That's a pretty big precinct you created.
It's hard to find land of that size. I said yesterday, we built up 5 hectares over 15 years. So
in the middle of Canberra.
In the middle of Canberra.
Next to Parliament House.
Parliament House. That doesn't happen very often. Look, we tend to, on the development side, we tend to look at large sites where you can actually master plan and add some value, and again create places. And we've got another one in Canberra now, which is only a hectare in size, but again in the middle of Canberra, we've amassed and developed over the years 3.5 hectares in one of the major town centres. So while we don't have aspirations to have our own hotel there, we have reached out to a potential party interested in a hotel there, and we work with them as well. So again, we do see that value in feeding, in having that mixed use and having a hotel as a cornerstone in part of a larger development. So that one's got 480 apartments, potentially a 100-room or 100-key hotel, and a 10 or 20,000 metre office building, again sitting next to other office buildings, a Westfield and a few other things. So we do see the hotels as a really good, interesting part of a development that brings some diversity in. And just even our offices at Realm, and just that interesting part of, as much as we cater to the locals there, we've got 500 rooms there, so each day you're seeing new people. And there's just that little bit of flavour. You've got the locals you always see, but you've always got something interesting happening. And okay, we've got Parliament House there, so we get quite a few sort of faces through there, but regardless, it's nice seeing new faces as much as you enjoy your locals. So no, I think it's important, and hotels do have a very definite role to play. And this one would be a sort of a mid-scale hotel rather than a big 5-star. But you see something like Crown Resorts, and it makes a massive change to that offering at Barangaroo and to Sydney. Yeah.
And then Todd Nisbet was talking yesterday about Crown Sydney with the branded residences, and you're no stranger to branded residences since you've been doing that for some time. What do you think of that space? Do you think we're going to see a lot more pop up through both big brands and small brands?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit cynical about it, because there's been a lot of, and I won't name names, but there's been a lot of developments that, again, when the hotel and resi market were going off, a lot of residential apartments sold on the back of a brand, and I think some of those are in the wrong locations. So it's been sort of pushing a square peg in a round hole, and I think the market in them will find those out. But where there's a legitimate purpose behind it and a legitimate reason for the hotel to be there and for those facilities to be there, it's unreal. The thing that we haven't seen yet in Australia really is that hotel services or it hasn't happened to any great extent, I don't think, where that concierge type experience and hotel services experience extends into the rooms, into the apartments properly. And there's been a bit of, I think Emporium in Brisbane, not too familiar. I remember they proposed it. I've never followed up how they went with it, but there's certainly that opportunity as people sort of downsizing, moving into apartments. Yes, they're getting a smaller apartment, but if we can lift that level of service up, it's helping both the developer sell the apartments, the owner of the apartment to enjoy the apartment, but obviously helps the hotel get a critical mass. So even in an event like COVID or low occupancy, there's still a nice little bubble of activity that keeps the back of house operating. So a great thing to do, but again, it only really works properly with a big site that you can master plan and coordinate these things.
When I was at the Emporium in Brisbane in December, Charlie, who was the GM then, was saying they were doing about 80 room service orders a day to the apartments.
Yeah, well, that's terrific that it's successful.
Laundry services, everything.
Yeah, and we're looking at, in Canberra, we've got our own big commercial laundry. We've got 600 rooms there. We've got our own commercial laundry that runs for 3 days. We invested quite a lot of money into a big facility, and we're actually starting a laundry facility, not just for necessarily other hotels, which will service, but we're actually looking at starting up a residential facility and having a linen service. So it's, I think there is, the more we sort of push into it, the better I think that the opportunities open up. I mean, there's other ones where you've seen hotels, I think in the US, where they're aligned with a retirement village or an aged care area, where again, you have that cross-pollination of that requirement for services. But having that base level of demand for your back-of-house service is fantastic for any hotel, because then you can scale up, specialise and really offer a much better product.
Awesome. Well, mate, thank you so much for joining us at AHICE again. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and well done on the growth. The growth seems to be continuing non-stop for you guys. There's always something happening.
No, thank you.
And before we have to go to a networking break now, but just a reminder for those watching from around the world that please do use the networking facility on the app as well. You can actually chat to anybody who's actually registered as a delegate. So just as a reminder, while we do a bit of it in person, you can do as much of it online as you want. So, cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Yuri. And now, thanks to Withers Worldwide, Robert Williams.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Howard. No such
Can
thing
you
as,
take us to coffee, please?
Morning tea. No such thing as overexposure. Could listen to Doma all day. Great interview. Very interesting. You mentioned branded residence. We've just signed what will be Australia's first branded resi deal. Major operator with a rockstar brand. So that will be coming soon. No doubt James will get the scoop. But a very interesting space. Morning tea sounds very English, doesn't it? I expect you might be having tea at home, but coffee here from the ladies and gentlemen at Lavazza. Just wanted to say 2 things, really. One, to our clients, it is a privilege to support our clients in good times and bad, and thank you for their ongoing business. And the second thing I wanted to say was to my team of lawyers and support staff, both here and in Singapore, many who are joining online, just say you're the best. Love working with you. Thank you, Howard, and enjoy morning coffee.
30 minutes. Thank you. Could we be back in 30 minutes, please? Thank you.